Chapter 1140. Most of the people who could come here were civil officials. They either relied on their writings, or relied on their family's influence to get to their positions. Some even relied on some shady means to get to their positions. But no matter how they entered the court, most of them had a common characteristic, and that was that they could speak but not act. It was undeniable that Confucianism could indeed teach people to be good and change the wildness in a person's heart. There were also other benefits. But the drawbacks were equally obvious. Some things were too rule-abiding. After a long time, they would become complacent. It was like moving their mouths and talking. They dared to comment on anything. Some of them even dared to criticize the emperor. But when it came to practical matters, they really couldn't do it. This didn't mean that they didn't have the ability, but because when two sides fought, the other side wouldn't listen to you. If there was a disagreement, they would draw their swords. This wasn't something that these scholars who studied Confucianism could compare to. It was important for people to know their own limits. If they knew that they couldn't do something, but still insisted on standing up, then it wasn't taking responsibility, but showing off. To put it bluntly, it was no different from courting death. It was just like the Tumu Fortress incident back then. How many civil officials of northern Ming had died? Among them, there were many who were truly talented. However, in the face of the ferocious Wuxia cavalry, were their eloquent tongues really of any use? No. After the previous incident, the imperial court was much quieter this time. For a time, Zhu Qiyu, who was originally full of hope, suddenly had an ugly expression. Just now, when everyone was talking so excitedly, he thought that they had already thought of a countermeasure. But now, it seemed that this wasn't the case at all. His gaze swept past the civil official group and naturally landed on the military general group, which had very few people. When it came to specific matters, especially when it came to leading troops to war, it still depended on the generals. But what made Zhu Qiyu a little disappointed was that even these generals who practiced martial arts didn't take the initiative to stand up at this moment. Instead, they all lowered their heads and pondered about something, as if there was something valuable under their feet that was worth attracting. The Great Ming dynasty had a long history of valuing literature and despising the military. It wasn't something that could be changed overnight. Although because of the changes in the political situation, the status of the generals had increased, but there was still a big gap between the two sides. Let's use a simple example. What is the most important thing in a war? Some people might talk about the morale of the soldiers, some would talk about the bravery of the generals, some would talk about whether this was a battle of justice, and some would talk about the right time, the right place, the right people, and so on. But the real key was logistics. In other words, it referred to the supply of food, fodder, and weapons. Think about it, if an army that was capable of fighting did not have food to eat and only had wooden sticks in their hands, how could they fight the enemy? How could they use their teeth to bite the enemy? Tear it apart with your bare hands? Thus, there was a saying that war was a war for money. It just so happened that the logistics of the army were decided by the civil officials. This was equivalent to having one's Achilles heel pressed down. Even if one wanted to fight alone, one couldn't. How could one win a battle in such a situation? Just like the 70,000 Liaodong cavalry. Why did they develop so quickly? Why were they so elite that even the 5-star army in Origin City was afraid of them? It was nothing more than that they had enough autonomy. They could harvest grain and grass on the grassland like the Mongolian cavalry. They could snatch good things when they saw them, which made them stronger and stronger. It was impossible to send troops to Liaodong without any taboos. It could be imagined that no matter who led the troops, the logistics would be fought over. This involved a lot of benefits. Whoever had the advantage would get countless benefits from it. Once the war was won, these people would not only get the benefits, but they would also get the credit. If they were defeated, it would have nothing to do with them. The responsibility would all fall on the generals who led the troops. With this comparison, it was no wonder that the generals were not willing to stand up and take the responsibility that originally belonged to them. Not to mention, the opponent of this battle was Bugnam of Gojoseon. This person had the title of the god of war. How could he be so easy to deal with? The generals were all silent. Zhu Qiyu was a little angry. Before he could say anything, the civil officials at the side had already launched an attack. Perhaps they also felt that the contrast between just now and now was too big. They were afraid that the emperor would vent his anger on them. Therefore, they were ruthless and as unpleasant as they could be. What's wrong? Aren't you generals? Your duty is to go to the battlefield and kill the enemy. Even if you die on the battlefield, you won't hesitate. This is your destiny. That's right. Isn't it your duty to send troops to war? Why are you afraid of death now? None of you dare to accept the challenge. It's really disappointing. No wonder Bugnam of Gojoseon is so arrogant. It's all because of you useless people. You useless things. You really don't know what to do. You really make people look down on you. Yes, it's too disappointing. The imperial court spent so much money to feed you. The criticism came one after another. It was as if they couldn't show their righteousness if they didn't step on them. In just a short while, the generals' faces were as red as a monkey's buttocks. Some of the more thin-skinned ones wanted to find a hole to hide in. This was really like the saying, those who enjoy the show are not afraid of things getting out of hand. Faced with the criticism of the entire civil officials, a general called Li Tong finally couldn't take it anymore. As a second-grade general in the imperial court, he naturally had his own personal pride. Especially now that the status of a general was rising step by step, he was very optimistic about the future. More than once, he had told the other generals in private that spring was coming for the generals. But now, before he could achieve his goal, he was being slandered in such a way. He was really angry. When he saw that the other generals and colleagues were all evasive and didn't even dare to fart in front of the civil officials, he angrily stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, this subject is willing to lead the army, but I have a request." Finally, someone was willing to take the initiative to step forward. Naturally, Zhu Qiyu was overjoyed. When he looked at the person, even his gaze became much friendlier. "Oh, General Li, I don't know what request you have. Why don't you tell me? I hope that the matter of the provisions will be managed by the officials I've chosen." In this way, Li Tong boldly made his request. Just as he was about to continue speaking, he didn't expect that the civil officials had already exploded. "How is this possible? This is against the rules." "Then, won't everything be decided by you generals? Once you have disloyal thoughts, how can you control it?" "Absolutely not. If something really happens, it will be a big matter. It will be much more dangerous than the matter in Liaodong." Yes, we absolutely can't agree." The discussion rose again, followed by a group attack. Li Tong, who wasn't good with words, was instantly drowned in a sea of verbal attacks. This time, not only would the civil officials not agree, but even Emperor Zhu Qiyu wouldn't agree. As an emperor, as a monarch, how could he control his army? Wasn't it shown by eating, drinking, and defecating? If he gave the generals too much power, who knew if it would spur some people's ambitions and cause them to do something unfavorable to him? If that was the case, then he would suffer a great loss. No emperor would agree to such a dangerous matter, let alone Zhu Qiyu, who had forcefully taken the throne. Perhaps it was because he didn't take the right path when he took the throne, so he was very afraid that someone would threaten him. It was even more impossible for him to agree to Li Tong's request. Shaking his head, Zhu Qiyu said with an unquestionable tone, "Generally, you've heard everyone's reaction. We absolutely can't agree to this matter." Zhu Qiyu's words set the tone for the matter. Li Tong knew that it was useless to say more. However, since he had already stepped out, it was impossible for him to retreat. He could only cup his hands and say, "Since it's like this, everything will be decided by your Majesty. This subject will only be responsible for leading the troops to fight." Li Tong was forced to accept the challenge. In a situation where no other generals stepped out, Zhu Qiyu finally appointed him as the general leading the troops. He took 200,000 soldiers, 50,000 of which were veterans and 150,000 of which were new recruits. He ordered them to prepare within 7 days and send troops to support Liaodong. As if to ease Li Tong's heart, Zhu Qiyu especially said during the court meeting that no matter who was in charge of logistics and provisions, they couldn't make things difficult for General Li and had to do their best to cooperate. The officials naturally agreed, but no one knew what would happen. Su Yozhen, the Crown Prince's junior tutor, Grand Scholar and Minister of Justice, didn't say anything from beginning to end. He just watched coldly from the sidelines and sneered in his heart. Before the troops had even been sent out, General Li Tong had already attracted the dissatisfaction of the civil officials. Li Tong could even imagine that it would be strange if he wasn't targeted. If he didn't do this, how could the civil officials vent their anger of being accused of not trusting him? It seemed that the result of this battle had already been decided. Sigh, could it be that the great Ming's luck was really coming to an end? The Hu estate. Minister of Rights Hu Shao. Although he still had the title of minister, he hadn't been to court for a while. This was because the relationship between Baiming and Bugnam of Gojoseon had changed greatly. This made his position as Yang Chendong's father-in-law very awkward. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble and to avoid being targeted, Hu Shao was sick and stayed at home. Not only that, but the other members of the Hu family were also ordered to stay at home and not go out. They had to be as low-key as possible. Chapter 1141. Although he had not left his room, he was still able to receive news of what had happened in the imperial court. Hu Shao had been the Minister of Rights for many years, and his students were spread all over the world. He naturally had many sources of information. It was precisely because he knew what had happened in the imperial court that Hu Shao, who was with his son in his study, fell into deep thought. Hu Zhangming also knew what had happened in the imperial court, and he was much more nervous than his father. Father, the emperor is about to move against Chendong. Will we be implicated? How about I go find the 5-star army in the city? There's no need for that. It's not time yet. Hu Shao slowly opened his eyes, a faint smile on his lips. It was clear that everything was under his control. Son, don't think that we'll be in danger if we really start fighting. It's said that even when 2 armies fight, they don't kill the envoys. But father. Seeing that Hu Zhangming was about to say something, Hu Shao waved his hand and said, relax. Since Zhu Qiyu was able to become emperor, he's not so foolish. He's keenly aware that before he destroys Bugnam of Gojoseon, he won't be able to touch us. Otherwise, he doesn't even know what the consequences will be. On the contrary, the more victories Bugnam of Gojoseon wins on the front lines, the more apprehensive the emperor will be. Unless it's time for a life-and-death struggle, as long as we don't stir up trouble, nothing will happen. The older the ginger, the spicier it was. Hu Shao was so confident not only because of his thorough analysis of the situation and his deep understanding of Zhu Qiyu's personality, but also because of 2 other reasons. First, Su Yozhen was in the imperial court. If something really did happen, he would definitely inform him. Second, Baiming had Yang Chendong's brothers and sisters in the capital. If even they were fine, how could he possibly be in danger? With these 2 reasons, Hu Shao was naturally brimming with confidence. On the contrary, he was now worried about whether Yang Chendong could stop Baiming's army. If Yang Chendong was seriously injured, or even destroyed, then as his in-laws, they would be seen as accomplices. That would be the real danger. Not to mention that the Hu mansion was as calm as water. Yang Chendong, who was running amok in Liaodong, had telegraphed everything that happened there to him. Looking at the telegram sent by Wang Shan, Yang Chendong chuckled and said, 200,000? Aren't they looking down on our 5-star army too much? After a brief evaluation, Yang Chendong put it aside. Obviously, he had already predicted that Baiming would send troops, so he wasn't surprised by what he had expected. His main focus was now on the next territory to be conquered, Gulinwei. Ever since Yang Chendong brought Lang Si Shifu to the northern part of Liaodong, everything went smoothly. Besieging a city was as easy as entering an uninhabited land. In addition, the surrendered General Song Yong played a big role. Just like the previous Shishin guards, they didn't even fire a shot. Song Yong entered the city first to persuade them to surrender and occupied the city. More than 1,000 Ming soldiers and tens of thousands of great Ming people were included in Yang Xie's territory. This time, to deal with Gulinwei, Yang Chendong used the same trick. Song Yong volunteered to go first, and once they occupied the city, it was tantamount to opening the southwest gate of New, Gandusi's headquarters. They weren't far from their goal. Young Master, Hai Si Shifu sent a telegram. They have entered Kuo Island, Sakhalin Island in the future, along the waterway. After a fierce battle, they successfully occupied it. Beta Persei brought a telegram that he had just received to Yang Chendong's temporary tent. Good. When he heard the news, Yang Chendong couldn't help but laugh heartily. Kuo Island was occupied, which meant that Commander Song Quan had no way to retreat on the sea. He had to either fight with him or surrender. There was no third choice. As if confirming the saying, good things come in pairs, not long after, Song Yong also rushed back. Along with him was Gulinwei's Grand Xian Huzhe. Obviously, he had been persuaded, and this time, he was here to surrender. Similarly, it didn't take much effort to capture Gulinwei. Yang Chendong was one step closer to achieving his goal of capturing Liaodong. Very good, Song Yong did well. Tell him that he will be heavily rewarded. When we completely capture Gandusi's headquarters, we will definitely reward him. Yang Chendong said with a smile. Although Song Yong was a surrendered general and his ability to fight was not very good, his eloquence was not bad. He was also a talent. Yang Chendong had already thought about it. After the war, he would send him to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He should be able to play a big role. After Gulinwei was taken down, the next target would be the Fushan Guards, which was the Turlanwei Guards headquarters. Once they took down this place, they would be able to directly face the highest level of power in the Liaodong region. If they could take down this place without shedding any blood, it would be perfect. Beta Persei passed the message to Song Yong. Song Yong was naturally excited. He originally thought that he was just a surrendered general and would never have the chance to raise his head in this life. He didn't expect that he would be able to enter the eyes of Bugnam of Gojoseon. Thinking about his future, he decided to continue to make contributions. So after returning to the barracks to rest for a night, he continued to rush forward and went straight to Gandusi's headquarters. Yang Chendong led the army through Gulinwei early the next morning. At this time, it was already May. The weather was getting warmer and warmer. After the snow melted, the speed of the army's advance was also a lot faster. 2 days later, Song Yong sent news that Gandusi's headquarters was already empty. Whether it was the soldiers or the people in the headquarters, they had all disappeared. They should have all gathered in Gandusi's headquarters, so Song Yong directly went to Gandusi's headquarters in the Liaodong region. Another 5 days passed. When Yang Chendong led the army to Gandusi's headquarters, bad news came. The cavalry scouts reported that Song Yong's head was hung on the city wall of Gandusi's headquarters. As soon as the news reached Yang Chendong's ears, he was shocked and furious. Although Song Yong was a surrendered general, he was now representing the 5-star army. As the saying goes, envoys should not be killed in a war. Song Yong was killed just like that. This was clearly a slap to the 5-star army's face. It was a slap to the Bugnam of Gojoseon's face. Young master, Song Yong can't die just like that. This is clearly looking down on our 5-star army. Let's fight. Beta Persei's eyes were shining as he spoke. Along the way, he originally thought that there would be a big battle to fight. This was the time to show off his skills. He didn't expect things to go so smoothly. Originally, he thought that Gandusi would surrender. Although he would be happy, he didn't go to the battlefield after all. But now, Song Yong was killed. This was clearly a demonstration by the Baiming generals of Gandusi. If he didn't kill this trend, who would take the 5-star army seriously in the future? Yang Chendong didn't answer immediately. Although Song Yong's death made him very angry, he couldn't solve the problem by being impulsive. The most important thing now was to understand the situation in Gandu Si. Only by understanding the other party's background would he be able to come up with the best strategy. Beta Persei, contact the intelligence personnel in Gandu Si immediately. I want to know how many Baiming army there are here and who killed Song Yong. Yes, young master. Beta Persei nodded and turned to leave. Yang Chendong's eyes were cold and angry. Someone actually dared to kill one of his men, and an envoy at that. He had to admit that some people were really bold. Since that was the case, he didn't mind being ruthless and using some cruel means to tell the world what would happen if they didn't follow the rules. The intelligence department acted very quickly. Yang San, the head of the security bureau, had already arranged a lot of people here, so the situation in the city quickly spread out. According to a centurion bribed by the security bureau, Song Yong's death was caused by Zhong Cheng, the commander of the city. The telegram described the whole process of Song Yong's death in detail. Originally, as an envoy, Song Yong could have left the city safely if he failed to persuade them to surrender. As the commander, Song Quan also had the same idea. Although he didn't like his own family and thought that they had no backbone, he would still abide by the rules of war between two armies. Things went bad because of Zhong Cheng. He didn't know where he found out that Song Yong had 100,000 taels of silver on him. This was originally given to him by Yang Chendong. If he succeeded in persuading Song Yong to surrender, this would be their way of expressing their sincerity. Logically speaking, if they didn't reach an agreement, Song Yong should have left the city and wouldn't have handed over the 100,000 taels of silver. But the greedy Zhong Cheng didn't care about this. He thought that since they were going to become enemies, it would be a waste if he didn't take the 100,000 taels. So he led the soldiers to stop Song Yong at the city gate and asked him to hand over the banknotes. Otherwise, he would die. After Song Yong was chosen by Yang Chendong, his whole person changed. He had a bright future, so of course he wouldn't hand over the banknotes and show his incompetence again. Considering that he was an envoy of the 5-star army, not only did he not hand over the banknotes, he also loudly reprimanded Zhong Cheng, making the soldiers at the city gate hear clearly. Being reprimanded in public like this, Zhong Cheng's face naturally didn't look good. In a rage, he swung his sword and chopped Song Quan. Naturally, the 100,000 taels of silver also fell into Zhong Cheng's pocket. This matter was seen by many people, so Zhong Cheng deliberately said that this was the fate of those who dared to surrender to the 5-star army. You're courting death. Yang Chendong's face was full of anger. He punched the sand table that was temporarily set up. With just one punch, the solid wood table was completely destroyed. Young master, calm down. This Zhong Cheng really deserves to die. The intelligence department also sent news that this person's reputation in the city isn't good, especially his greed and lust. That's known by everyone. Just counting the number of concubines, he has taken as many as 13 and even gave birth to 3 fat sons for him. His eldest son is already 12 years old and is now running amok in the city. I heard that he's even worse than his father. Beta Persei also said with a face full of anger. Chapter 1142. They're all in cahoots, Yang Chendong said angrily. Young master, the Zhong family is one of the biggest merchants in the Baiming capital. They've taken quite a lot of goods from our commerce department and earned quite a bit of money. Do you want to deal with his family? We'll let them know the consequences of not following the rules of the 5-star army, Beta Persei said when he saw that the young master's anger had yet to dissipate. People always said that one shouldn't bring trouble to one's family. Yang Chendong naturally wouldn't casually bring trouble to Zhong Cheng's family. But since his 12-year-old son was a bad person, it was normal to get rid of him according to the rules. As for the Zhong family, sorry, but they'll be removed from the list of merchants in the future. I'll take note of this. After we take down Terran City, we'll still have to hold a trial. At that time, we'll let the people decide. If Zhong Cheng really didn't teach his son well, it's better to get rid of him as soon as possible. Yang Chendong didn't say it explicitly, but he didn't object. This was enough to explain everything. Dealing with Zhongcheng would have to wait until they took down Terran City. The most important thing now was how to take down the city. According to the intelligence department, in order to prepare for the arrival of the 5-star army, the commander had gathered some of the nearby guards in Terran City. In addition to the original soldiers in the city, the Biming army now had close to 100,000 people. It was truly a powerful force. On the other hand, Yang Chendong only had 8,000 elite soldiers from the 4th Infantry Division, 20,000 North Korean C-rank soldiers, and the Northern Ming Guards who had come all the way to Long, which added up to about 10,000. Altogether, there were no more than 40,000 people. 40,000 against 100,000, and it was the main attack. This was basically impossible in the eyes of others, but in Yang Chendong's eyes, it was a completely different matter. The reason why he brought the 4th Division and not the other cavalry troops was to attack the city. Now, it seemed that he had to use it. Inform the commander to prepare to attack the city. Inform the other troops to prepare to assist in the attack. Inform the 4th Division of the Sea to be on standby and prepare to bombard Terran City. Yang Chendong gave out orders one after another. Since they didn't have enough troops and the enemy still wanted to defend, it was impossible to solve the problem peacefully. They might as well use the most powerful firearms. Even though it would inevitably cause some unnecessary casualties, it was better than losing their own men and losing their own soldiers. Ling Decheng was very excited when he received the order. Ever since he entered the Liaodong region, he had been looking for a chance to show off his skills. From the telegram, he found out that both the 1st Cavalry Division and the new army had done a lot. Only his 4th Division hadn't done anything. All they did was follow the 6th Young Master and take over some of the cities that Song Yong had occupied. This made him feel very unbalanced. To be able to follow the 6th Young Master, it was the perfect opportunity to show off his skills. Now that he didn't do anything, it would be a lie to say that he didn't feel wronged at all. Even in his dreams, he wanted to show off the strength of the 4th Division. He originally thought that Song Yong had gone to Terran City and that he wouldn't have a chance. Now, the Liaodong army dared to kill Song Yong, who was in the middle of a peace negotiation. This angered the 6th Young Master. Now, it was time for them to show off. Gather the entire division and prepare for battle. Tell the 4 regimental commanders to report to me. After Ling Decheng finished speaking, he laughed heartily and went to the sand table to plan the attack. Within Terran City, Commanding Officer Song Quan sat in the main hall with a dignified expression. Beside him sat Commander Zhong Cheng and Commander Qian Shiyi Ligang. Commanding Officer Song Quan was a Grade 2 general. To be able to reach this position, Song Quan was quite capable. Furthermore, from the fact that he hadn't moved from his position for 7 years, it could be seen that he was a smooth and slick person. The Great Ming dynasty valued the civil and despised the military. This was especially so for the generals who held great power. It was very easy for the emperor to be suspicious of them. Reality also proved that if it wasn't for the emperor's suspicion and the civil officials' jealousy, the Great Ming dynasty wouldn't have been destroyed. As a commanding officer of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, Song Quan was able to sit in his position for 7 years. This was enough to show that he was very good at dealing with people. Otherwise, he would have been suppressed to death by the civil officials. It was because of this that when he heard that the 5-star army's peace envoy, Song Yong, had died at the city gates, his face instantly darkened. His position meant that he couldn't surrender to Yang Chendong. Unless there was an order from the Biming emperor, if he really did so, none of his family members in the Biming capital would be able to survive. However, he didn't make this decision of his own accord. As a general who held great power in the military, Song Quan had a deep understanding of the 5-star army. It was because of this that he knew how powerful the other party was. This kind of enemy wasn't someone he could fight against. He couldn't surrender, and he couldn't win. Song Quan was prepared to sacrifice himself for a righteous cause to protect his family in the capital. Therefore, in the face of Song Yong's words, all he could do was to drive the other party away and wait for Yang Chendong to fight. When the time was right, he would commit suicide. With his own life, he could exchange the safety of his whole family, or he could also protect the safety of the people in the city. But he didn't expect Zhongqing to be so daring as to force Song Yong to kill out of greed. This would create a situation where only one side would be able to survive. When the time came, even if he died, the civilians in the city wouldn't have it easy either. Did this Zhongqing not have a brain? Did he not know that once the 5-star army took Terran City, all the money he had would be nothing more than a wedding dress for the enemy? What was the use of money that couldn't be taken, and even if it was taken, it was useless? But it was too late to say anything now. Song Yong was already dead, and the dead couldn't be brought back to life. What they had to do now was to solve the current problem and save as many people as possible with the least amount of casualties. Looking at Zhongqing with a murderous gaze, Song Quan said, "General Zhong, Song Yong is already dead. The 5-star army will be attacking the city soon. Why don't you take the lead?" "Why should I?" Zhongqing's expression turned ugly. From the moment Song Yong died, he knew that things were going to go south. He didn't think that someone would risk his life for money. If he had known, he wouldn't have done such a thing even if he was beaten to death. But since he was already dead, there was no point in thinking about it. Thinking about the 100,000 soldiers in the city and the less than 50,000 5-star army outside the city, he regained his courage. But now, the commander was asking him to fight the 5-star army. Wasn't that the same as asking him to die? He wasn't stupid enough to agree to it. Everyone knew that it was easy to gain merits by being the vanguard, but it was also very dangerous. Perhaps if it was another ambitious general, he would fight for this position. But as a member of the Zhong clan in the capital, he had an incomparable background. He came to the Liaodong region just to gain experience. He didn't need such a great merit. Only then did he refuse without even thinking about it. Sitting on the right was the commander, Yi Ligang. He was a handsome middle-aged man in his early 30s. To be able to reach this position and become a rank 3 general, it wasn't because he had a powerful background. Instead, he relied on his own efforts to get to where he was today. It could be said that whether it was in terms of intelligence or bravery, he was one of the top 5 people in the Liaodong region. Yi Ligang, who could be called an all-rounder, knew his fate the moment he heard the guards say that Zhongqing had killed Song Yong at the city gates. He was so angry that he called Zhongqing a stupid pig. "Just watch, because this person is likely to bury all of us in the city." Even on the battlefield, killing a general of the 5-star army wasn't a big deal. In a battle between 2 armies, who wouldn't die? But killing an unarmed envoy was completely different. That was openly breaking the rules and slapping Bugnam of Gojoseon's face. Who was Bugnam of Gojoseon? He was in existence on par with the Southern and Baiming emperors. In terms of territory, he wasn't much worse. He was just someone with a lower reputation. How could such a person be so easy to provoke? Who was Zhongqing? His family had some reputation in the capital and he had made some money in the past few years. Did he really think that he was invincible and could do whatever he wanted? Did he think that he could kill people without following the rules? From that moment on, Yi Ligang had sentenced Zhongqing to death. And now, Zhongqing was openly disobeying the commander's orders. Yi Ligang didn't know what to say about this person. It seemed that the word stupid wasn't enough to describe him. Sure enough, as soon as Zhongqing refused, Song Quan flew into a rage. "General Zhong, do you think I'm negotiating with you? Let me tell you, this is a military order. If you don't obey, you will be punished according to military law." The so-called punishment according to military law was beheading. Zhongqing, who felt that things were not going well, pointed at Song Quan and said, "Commander, you can't do this. Over the years, our Zhong family has given you a lot of money. Shut up. If you dare to mess around, you will be slapped 30 times, Song Quan said angrily. That's right. Over the years, he had been able to secure his position because he had given a lot of money to the higher-ups. He had no choice but to do so. If he hadn't done so, he would have been schemed against by others. Among them, the Zhong family had paid a lot of money. If it was in the past, even if it was because of this, he would not do anything to Zhongqing. But now, seeing that Tren City was about to fall and he was about to die, how could he still be threatened by Zhongqing? Chapter 1143. Zhongqing finally shut his mouth after hearing Song Quan's 30 slaps. He could tell that Song Quan was going to abandon him. Now that he was under someone else's roof, he had no choice but to lower his head. He thought to himself that when he had the chance to spread the news, he would definitely tell his family about this. After that, he could only reluctantly agree. Since Commander has given the order, Zhongqing will follow it. I will go and arrange for people to defend the city. Zhongqing walked out of the hall, leaving Song Quan and Yiligang behind. Thinking about the unfavorable situation, Song Quan asked, Commander, I'm afraid that Zhongqing alone won't be able to stop the 5-star army's attack. I heard that the 4th Infantry Division is mainly armed with firearms. Yes, how could I not know that I can't stop them? But do we have a choice? Song Quan slowly opened his eyes and said with a sigh. Then, as if he thought of something, he looked at Yiligang and said, You are different from me. You are an orphan, your parents are long gone, and your wife is newly married. She is currently in Terran City. The court doesn't have any evidence against you, so you don't have to die like you. With your ability, even if you join the 5-star army, you will have a bright future. Lord Commander, I've never had such thoughts. Yiligang hurriedly explained. Song Quan interrupted him and said, All these years, how could I not know what kind of person you are? It's just that there is no need to make unnecessary sacrifices. Moreover, Bugnam of Gojoseon is indeed a dragon among men. I know that he is very good to the Han people, so he should be good to the Han generals as well. With him, the Han people's status will be higher and their lives will be better. Isn't this what we want to see? Sigh, if it wasn't for my family, I would also consider joining the 5-star army and fight for Bugnam of Gojoseon, fighting for the Han people's future. Yiligang would never have thought that Song Quan would be the one to say such heartfelt words. For a moment, he was stunned and didn't know what to say. Just like what Song Quan said, Yiligang had a good impression of the 5-star army. Especially after learning about their deeds from various intelligence reports, he admired them even more. However, due to his identity and faction, he had no choice but to hide it in his heart. Now, the choice was right in front of him. He had gone from being a bystander to being in the situation. It would be a lie to say that Yiligang did not have any ideas about where to go from here. However, when he thought about how everything he had today was all because of Song Quan's recommendation, he could not let down this benefactor in his life. And now, it was this noble person who was advising him to surrender to the enemy. His heart, which had been suppressed, began to stir again. Yiligang did not immediately object, which was equivalent to expressing his attitude. How could Song Quan not know? He continued, Ligang, it's not that I don't have any selfish motives. You know, my family is in the capital. When I'm around, naturally, no one dares to bully them. However, once I leave, it's hard to say. If one day, and I'm saying if, you have a firm foothold among the 5 stars, please help my family if possible. This is also my last request to you. Commander, please don't say that. If I can survive this time, your family will be my family, and your parents will be my parents. Yiligang immediately swore. Good, good. Song Quan patted Yiligang's shoulder with a gratified expression. The last worry in his life had been removed, and he could finally go without worry. Outside the city, Ling Dechang called the 4 commanders under him over and seriously discussed the plan to attack the city. It wasn't easy to get a chance to attack, and everyone's opinion was surprisingly unanimous. They were not in a hurry to attack the city. First, they would scare the enemy and let them know that sometimes, it wasn't easy to die even if they wanted to. 4 hours later, after the 4th Lu Division was fully prepared to attack the city, the first gunshot rang out. With the Type 95 firearms that could easily fire from 300 to 400 meters away, when the gunshots rang out, the Ming soldiers guarding Terran City became live targets. Many of them even had bows and arrows in their hands as they stuck their heads out of the battlements, waiting for the 5-star army to come closer. Bullets flew over and accurately hit their bodies. This was simply an unfair and unequal battle. One side could attack as they pleased, while the other side could only passively take a beating. They couldn't even see the appearance of their opponents clearly, but hundreds of Biming soldiers were hit. Some died on the spot, while others were injured by gunshots and fell to the ground screaming in pain. If they died, then so be it, everything would be over. But those who were injured by gunshots, when their cries of pain rang out from the battlements, the shock it brought to their comrades was so great that it completely exceeded the expectations of the defending general, Zhong Cheng. He originally thought that with the advantage of numbers, they would be able to fight evenly with the 5-star army. In addition, they had the higher ground and were relying on the city walls, so it wasn't impossible for them to push back the 5-star army. But after this exchange, Zhongqing realized how wrong he was. As the headquarters of the new, Gandu, it was where the commander was located. Bei Shi also placed great importance on it, and once sent people to send over 200 firearms. They had always been treated as treasures and kept in the armory. This time, Zhongqing even took them out, wanting to properly display their power. But after this exchange, these seemingly treasured firearms were completely useless, unable to pose any threat to the 5-star army. They couldn't even attack from a certain distance, so how could they display their power? Zhongqing, who was on top of the city gate tower, saw that more and more soldiers were dying and the number of injured was increasing. The soldiers guarding the city were terrified because of this. More and more soldiers hid behind the city gate tower and didn't even dare to show their heads. Zhongqing couldn't help but be furious. He loudly ordered everyone to shoot arrows outside the city. Since the general had given the order, the soldiers below didn't dare to disobey. Helpless, they could only risk their lives and shoot arrows outside. But very quickly, those who showed their heads didn't have a good ending. Out of 10 people, at least half of them were hit or injured, and the remaining half had their arrows shot to God knows where, unable to pose any threat to the outside world. Under the constant orders, the number of injured and dead increased, and the morale of the Biming army continued to drop. Having completely lost the initiative, the Biming army could only take a beating and hide. Outside of Terran City, the 4th Master Lu's attack shocked everyone. Behind them, the 20,000 North Korean soldiers who were preparing to attack, as well as the 10,000 Biming soldiers who surrendered along the way, were also shocked. They originally thought that with the enemy's high walls and the commander personally leading the attack, this attack would be extremely difficult, and who knew how many lives would be lost here. This was especially true for the Biming soldiers who had surrendered. Thinking about how they had just escaped from the tiger's den and into the wolf's den, they felt extremely uncomfortable. But who would have thought that when the attack started, the situation would be one-sided? The Terran City Biming soldiers, who had the advantage in numbers, didn't even have the ability to retaliate. When this scene fell into everyone's eyes, many of the soldiers were extremely excited. The situation on the battlefield was completely out of their expectations, and it gave them hope, a chance to perform meritorious deeds. General, the North Korean soldiers and the Biming army who surrendered are asking if we can attack the city now. Ling Dechang was still smiling as he watched his soldiers flaunt their might when the messenger walked over and reported. "There's no rush, there's no rush." Ling Dechang waved his hand and laughed. "Tell them that it's not time for them to attack yet. Let's fight for a while longer and completely destroy their morale. That's when we'll be able to win this battle, ha ha ha." Ling Dechang was very familiar with his weapons, and he was even more familiar with the power of his weapons. He knew that if he wanted to obtain the greatest victory with the smallest price, he couldn't rush it. In any case, he had brought a lot of bullets with him this time, so he treated it as giving the soldiers a chance to shoot. They didn't charge, and bullets continued to fly. 4 hours later, the sky turned dark and everything became quiet. More and more injured soldiers were carried down from the city walls. Cries of pain and anguish could be heard everywhere. When the Biming soldiers who hadn't entered the battlefield heard this, their faces turned pale and their expressions changed greatly. Facing an enemy who could easily kill you from a distance without even facing you head-on, they didn't have much of a chance of winning. They all thought in their hearts, if it were them, how much confidence would they have in winning? The commanding general, Zhongcheng, also had a dejected look on his face. He originally thought that with his advantages, he would be able to fight on par with the 5-star army. If things went well, he would be able to defeat them. That would be an outstanding military achievement. Who would have thought that the result would be like this? After fighting for 4 hours, they couldn't even touch the corner of their opponent's clothes. He only got the result of more than 300 soldiers being killed and more than 1,000 injured. Of course, what was worse was that the morale of the soldiers had been greatly damaged. If this continued tomorrow, he really didn't dare to imagine how the army would be able to continue fighting if they didn't have any combat power. General Zhong, the commander has ordered you to come to his residence to discuss military matters. One of Song Quan's soldiers came in front of Zhongcheng. I understand. Zhongcheng nodded expressionlessly. Lead the way. In fact, Zhongcheng was prepared to go to Song Quan even without him coming to find him. There was no way to fight a war like this, and there was no way to win it. He wanted to resign from his position as the general of the city defense. The commander's residence was brightly lit at this moment. When Zhongcheng arrived, he saw a busy scene. He saw many people walking in and out, and they were carrying all kinds of things in their hands. It felt like they were moving house. Zhongcheng, who didn't understand what was going on, strode into the main hall and saw Song Quan and the commander, Yi Ligang, sitting there. Chapter 1144. Commander, what are the people outside busy with? Zhongcheng asked in confusion after entering the hall. General Zhong, don't ask so many questions. Let me ask you, what are your thoughts after today's battle with the 5-star army? Do you think we can defend Tren City with just us? Song Quan didn't answer Zhongcheng's question. Instead, he took the initiative to ask about the battle. Sigh. At the mention of this matter, Zhongcheng's face was ashen as he said, don't mention it. The firearms in the hands of the 5-star army are simply too powerful. They can even shoot from afar and are extremely accurate. We didn't even see their shadows and we've already lost over 1,000 people. If this battle continues like this, there's really no way to continue. Oh, so that means we won't be able to defend the city? Song Quan asked again. That's right. We can't defend it. This time, Zhongcheng answered honestly. If that's the case, what does General Zhong think about breaking out of the encirclement? Song Quan asked as he already expected Zhongcheng to say this. Breaking out of the encirclement? This question was completely out of Zhongcheng's expectations. Then, he remembered that when he entered the mansion, he saw those people moving things back and forth. He immediately understood that Song Quan was preparing to escape. Seeing that Zhongcheng seemed to be thinking about something, Song Quan looked at Yi Ligang on the other side. The two of them looked at each other and nodded. Song Quan said to Zhongcheng again, that's right, we should break out of the encirclement. You know the situation this afternoon. The 5-star army has very powerful firearms. It's not something we can stop. If we don't break out of the encirclement early, once they attack with this method, I'm afraid we won't even have a chance. Yes, Commander, you're right. But isn't it too rushed to break out of the encirclement tonight? After seeing the power of the 5-star army, Zhongcheng agreed with this decision. However, he still felt that breaking out of the encirclement now was too rushed. He didn't even have the slightest bit of preparation. It's not rushed. Who can guarantee that the 5-star army won't attack the city tomorrow? If that's the case, I'm afraid we won't even have a chance to break through. Seeing that Zhongcheng didn't immediately object, Song Quan continued to persuade him. The 5-star army was indeed powerful. No one knew what kind of attack they would launch tomorrow. In the end, Zhongcheng nodded and agreed. Let's break through the encirclement then. I just don't know what kind of plan the commander has. I've already discussed this matter with Yi Qian. Let's do it like this tonight, in the middle of the night, dark clouds covered the moonlight and the sky was completely dark. Looking at Telin City from afar, other than the moving torches on the city walls, which were soldiers patrolling, everything else was pitch black. It gave off a very quiet feeling. However, the atmosphere suddenly changed. The originally quiet city was suddenly filled with rumbling sounds. Then, the west gate was opened and a large group of people rushed out. They appeared like a whirlwind and rushed towards the river guards. After the west gate was opened, the south gate opened as well. Unlike the other gates, the south gate remained silent after it was opened. Not a single soldier walked out from it. The contrast between the two was very obvious. Outside the south gate, Yang Qindong, who had already changed into a golden cloak, was slowly approaching under the protection of 1,000 black knights. Behind the black knights were tens of thousands of North Korean soldiers and 10,000 Biming army soldiers. They arrived at the south gate unhurriedly. Then, they entered as if there was no one around. Just like that, they entered the city through the gate openly. They didn't encounter any obstruction or resistance during the process. In the commander's residence of Telin City, the commander, Song Quan, had already committed suicide in the courtyard. A white cloth was covering his body and a group of soldiers were kneeling on both sides of him. When Yang Qindong arrived, he saw this scene. "Greetings, Bugnam of Gojoseon." The moment Yang Qindong entered the courtyard, everyone, led by Yi Ligang, fell to their knees. Sigh, a proper burial. After Beta Persei opened the white cloth and confirmed that the deceased was indeed Song Quan, Yang Qindong sighed emotionally. "Thank you, Bugnam of Gojoseon." With Yi Ligang as the leader, everyone kowtowed once again. Song Quan died just like that. Perhaps he knew that if he didn't die, his family in Biming wouldn't be safe, so he sacrificed himself in exchange for everyone's lives. Yi Ligang knew the whole plan. He really wanted to prevent his benefactor from dying, but he also knew that it was useless. Song Quan's survival meant that his family in Biming had to die. There was no other choice but to sacrifice one person in exchange for everyone's lives. And before Song Quan died, he still did a lot of things. He really needed Yi Ligang to take care of his family in the future, so he first arranged for Zhongcheng, who was a thorn in his side, to leave the city. Then, he handed over all the military and political power to Yi Ligang, and then died peacefully. After Yi Ligang learned of the plan, he secretly sent someone to contact Yang Qindong. This was how the 5-star army safely entered the city and took over everything. "You're Yi Ligang. Let's talk inside." Yang Qindong already knew everything that had happened. He couldn't do anything about Song Quan's choice, but he also admired him. He was full of curiosity about Yi Ligang. What kind of person could make Song Quan sacrifice himself to protect him? Could he really guarantee that Yi Ligang would fulfill his promise after his death? In the main hall of the commander's residence, Peng Yu, Ba Daojiang, and the others, who had transformed into Long Wei, carefully inspected the place. After confirming that there were no problems, Yang Qindong stepped into the hall, followed by Yi Ligang, the commander-in-chief. Yang Qindong sat down on the main seat while Yi Ligang stood with his hands by his side. The two of them sized each other up. In the entire Liaodong region, Yi Ligang was an extremely famous existence. He was different from Tong Long. Although he was extremely courageous, he had relied on the help of his family to get to where he was today. Yi Ligang had relied entirely on himself. He had relied on his ability to wield both the pen and the sword to reach the position of commander-in-chief. For this reason, when the Liaodong cavalry was established, Fang Dingshan had personally appointed him as his deputy, but Song Quan had stopped him in the end. How could such a person not attract Yang Qindong's attention? Originally, he had wanted to see his ability in the Battle of Terran City, but he hadn't expected that the other party would surrender without even putting up a basic resistance. Of course, it was a good thing that he could take the initiative to surrender to him. Subduing the enemy without a fight, this was the highest level of victory in battle. And the person behind all of this was Yi Ligang, so Yang Qindong was naturally very interested in him. "Bugnam of Gojoseon, the surrendered general has a request." While Yang Chendong was sizing up the other party, Yi Ligang had already knelt down on the ground again. "How dare you?" Beta Persei shouted from the side. "You're just a surrendered general. What right do you have to make a request?" "Yes, the surrendered general knows that he's not qualified, but I hope that Bugnam of Gojosian will agree to this request." Thump, thump, thump. His forehead hit the ground 3 times in a row, and soon blood flowed from his forehead. It was obvious that he had used a lot of strength. "Let's hear it." Yang Chendong stretched out his hand to stop Beta Persei's next action and looked at Yi Ligang, who was kneeling on the ground, with interest. Now that he had a chance to speak, Yi Ligang said, "Bugnam of Gojosian, Commander Song committed suicide to save the people of Terran City from the flames of war. If there's a chance one day, please clear his name." "Thank you." When he sent a secret envoy to Yang Chendong to beg for surrender, he had said not to make things difficult for the people of Terran City. At that time, Yang Chendong had also agreed. However, he didn't say anything about clearing Song Quan's name. Now that Yi Ligang had suddenly brought it up, even Yang Chendong frowned slightly after hearing it. "General Yi, why didn't you mention this when you sent people to beg for surrender?" Reporting to Bugnam of Gojosian, when Commander Song was still here, everything was led by him. There are some things that a surrendered general can't say clearly. The secret envoy in charge of the surrender was arranged by Song Quan. Of course, he wouldn't mention clearing his name after death. In fact, he didn't even think about such a thing. What he cared about was the safety of his family in the capital and the hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians in Terran City. Since Song Quan didn't mention it, Yi Ligang couldn't not mention it. Now that he had the opportunity to talk to Yang Chendong, he brought it up. Yang Chendong nodded slightly with a look of understanding. Then, he looked at the kneeling Yi Ligang and asked with a smile, "You want this king to clear Song Quan's name? Aren't you worried that this king will be defeated and killed one day? If that's the case, clearing his name will be meaningless." There was a prerequisite for clearing Song Quan's name, and that was that Yang Chendong could succeed. Otherwise, not only would the matter of clearing his name be a joke, it would also bring great trouble to Song Quan's family. No. Although the surrendered general only lives in a remote corner, he has long heard of the 5-star Army's love for the people. A king who cares about the people of the world, how can his future be limited? This surrendered general boldly believes that the world will eventually belong to Bugnam of Gojosian. Yi Ligang was also smart. He took the opportunity to explain and flatter Yang Chendong. "Bootlicker." Beta Persei, who was standing at the side, said softly. How could these words escape the ears of Yang Chendong, who had entered the quasi-grandmaster realm? However, he didn't care. Instead, he chuckled and asked, "General Yi, you said that this king cares about the people in his heart. Are the Bai Ming Emperor and the Southern Ming Emperor not the same?" "It's not the same." Yi Ligang shook his head. If he was still the Bai Ming commandant, there were some things that he couldn't say even if he thought about it. Otherwise, it would be a choice, and it would be treacherous. But now, since he had chosen to surrender to the 5-star Army, he naturally didn't have any concerns. Chapter 1145. The Emperor of the Great Ming Dynasty talks about the safety of the people, but in reality, it is only for the stability of the regime. In their eyes, the officials and the major clans of the world are seeking benefits, finding a balance between them, and consolidating the regime. Bugnam of Gojosian is indeed different. Because of your appearance, the status of the Han people in the world has been raised by more than one level. This can be seen from yesterday when you only besieged the city and did not immediately attack. Based on this point, the surrendered general believes that you are a sincere ruler. After Yi Ligang finished speaking, he once again knelt on the ground, as if he had said all that he should say and would let Yang Chendong deal with him. The words just now were indeed the words of Yi Ligang's trusted aide. But how could it not be a representation? Presumably, in the entire Great Ming Dynasty, there should be many generals with such knowledge. When Yang Chendong heard this, he was naturally gratified. At least there was someone who understood what he did. "Good, I have to say, General Yi, your words really made me happy. Since that is the case, I will agree to your request. Once this prince has enough ability, I will definitely clear General Song Quan's name. And as you said, this prince does not want to see the Han people and the Ming army kill each other. There are still many cities in the Liaodong region that have not been captured. I don't know if you can do your part to help this prince. Yang Qindong took a fancy to Yi Ligang's identity as a commander. It would be more convenient for him to do some things than the dead Song Yong. In addition, he intended to test the other party's ability, so he spoke out. The surrendered general is duty-bound. How could Yi Ligang, who wanted to take the opportunity to show his ability, not agree? The surrendered general thanks Bugnam of Gojoseon for promising to clear General Song's name. Thank you again. Thump, 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 he kowtowed 3 more times, and blood overflowed from his forehead. Just as the two were talking, Longwei's voice came from outside the hall. 6th Young Master, Lu 4th Division Commander Ling Daqiang requests an audience. Let him in. Yang Qindong sat up straight with a smile on his face. After a dozen breaths of time, Ling Daqiang entered the hall with a wooden box in his hands. He knelt down in front of Yang Qindong, who was wearing a golden cloak. 6th Young Master, I was able to accomplish my mission. Zhongcheng has been killed. This is his head. Poor Zhongcheng, he didn't even know that he had been betrayed. They thought that Song Quan had really given the order to break out of the encirclement, but unbeknownst to them, not too far away from the southern gates, the Lu 4th Master teachers were already lying in ambush. As soon as they appeared, they would surround them and eliminate them. How could Zhongqing know about this? He was still happy that he was about to escape from danger. Following that, gunshots rang out and everything ended. Zhongqing was dead. Not only that, but his family members who followed him out of the city didn't end up well either. Most of them were captured, and his evil youngest son was also killed in the chaos. It could be said that they had avenged Song Yong. Yang Qindong didn't look at the head in the wooden box. Instead, he sighed and said, "Release the news that Zhongqing secretly escaped from the city and created an opportunity for the 5-star army to enter Terran City." After a series of resistance, Yi Ligang was captured and Commander Song Quan died in battle. As soon as Yang Qindong said this, Yi Ligang, who had just stood up, revealed a grateful expression. By pushing all the blame to the dead Zhongqing, Song Quan's family members in Baiming capital would be safe. Beta Persei agreed and immediately sent someone to spread the news. Yang Qindong asked Yi Ligang to stay behind and asked him about the Liaodong region. Yi Ligang already had thoughts of joining Yang Qindong, so he naturally told him everything he knew. Bugnam of Gojoseon, before the Liaodong region was renamed as the new Gandusi region, I followed Commander Song Quan here. I don't know everything here, but I know 90% of it. Let's start with the most powerful place, the Jianzhou Guards. Yi Ligang was indeed worthy of being chosen by Song Quan. He knew the situation here very well. Many of the things he said were the same as the information sent by the intelligence department. There were also some things that even the intelligence department didn't know. Okay. Seeing Yi Ligang stop talking, Yang Qindong laughed heartily and slapped his thigh. It seems that General Yi is indeed very familiar with the situation here. If that's the case, I wonder if you can persuade the nearby guard stations that haven't been taken down by our 5-star army? Yi Ligang didn't immediately answer. Instead, after thinking for a moment, he raised his head. It shouldn't be a problem. If Bugnam of Gojoseon trusts this Yi, then leave this matter to me. Seeing Yi Ligang so confident, Yang Qindong was even more happy. Okay, I'll leave this matter to you. How many soldiers do you need? There's no need. I'll just bring some personal guards. However, I hope that Bugnam of Gojoseon can give me some silver. This isn't to bribe anyone. It's just that some places are too poor. They can't even pay the soldiers. Speaking of this, Yi Ligang felt a bit embarrassed. After all, he was the commander of the Liaodong region. Logically speaking, he was in charge of the finances. If he said that there wasn't any pay for the soldiers, it really was a loss of face. Before coming, Yang Chendong had done his research. Although Zhu Qiyu had indeed earned quite a bit of money through the newly opened Zhu family bank, the lives of the soldiers weren't that good. For example, the Liaodong cavalry on the grasslands were still fine. They could be paid on time. However, the Liaodong region, which was too far away from the capital, couldn't do so. Every time it was time to pay, all sorts of reasons would be used to reduce it. As time passed, the silver became more and more insufficient. Knowing that this wasn't Yi Ligang's fault, Yang Chendong stood up and patted him on the shoulder. This king knows the situation. You don't have to feel burdened. How about this? I'll give you 1 million taels of silver. You can go and solve the problem. Not only the soldiers, but also the common people. You can help them. If it's still not enough, you can come and find this king. He didn't expect Yang Chendong to be so generous and benevolent. 1 million taels of silver was equivalent to half a year's salary for the Liaodong guard post. Yi Ligang patted his chest and promised, Bugnam of Gojoseon, don't worry. The silver will definitely be distributed to the soldiers and the common people. Your righteous deeds will also be known to the common people. Yi Ligang knew very well that Yang Chendong was trying to buy people's hearts. However, he also liked to do this kind of thing. If Zhu Qiyu had been willing to take out silver to buy people's hearts, the Liaodong guard post wouldn't have been so weak. Song Yong wouldn't have been able to convince several guard posts in succession. In the end, it was all because they didn't have money. Terran City was finally taken. The loss of the Liaodong guard post in the north also meant that the plan to invade Liaodong was already half successful. Yang Chendong didn't cheer because of this. He knew that once the news spread, Zhu Qiyu would definitely send reinforcements. If he didn't defeat these people, he would tell the acting emperor that Liaodong was no longer under his control and make him give up. This was the most important thing. The new army was still madly sweeping through the Liaodong guard post. All the guard posts they wanted to attack either surrendered early on or were defeated in the first battle. Except for a few soldiers who had a certain amount of fighting power, most of the guard posts were under their control. With the world's first cavalry division acting as a huge mountain blocking the Sa-Cha River Guard's front line, it suppressed the northern Ming army from advancing north for a long time. It was only when the northern Ming sent out reinforcements, with General Li Tong at the head of 200,000 troops, that the Liaodong guards were greatly encouraged and saw hope. During this time, Yi Ligang completed the task given to him by Yang Chendong very well. He integrated the guard posts in the Terran City, which included more than 20,000 surrendered soldiers from Baiming. The 100,000 soldiers in the Gatling City and the 10,000 surrendered soldiers that Yang Chendong brought along made a total of 130,000 soldiers. Yang Chendong naturally wouldn't be polite with such a force. Then he made a shocking decision. He changed the name of the Liaodong guard post to the 3 eastern provinces and used one of his students as the governor, a person named Lu Ji. Although Lu Ji was Yang Chendong's student, he was actually older than Yang Chendong. But in the spirit of learning without precedence, he was still convinced by Yang Chendong's knowledge, entered the Yang Family Academy, and became an excellent teacher. Because he was very good at management, he was promoted to the position of governor of the 3 eastern provinces. The position of general of the 3 eastern provinces was given to Yi Ligang. Not only that, he was allowed to have 100,000 soldiers, 30,000 of which could be cavalry. When the matter was announced, Yi Ligang, who didn't cry easily, failed to live up to expectations, and shed tears. Then he secretly swore in his heart that a gentleman would die for his friend and follow Yang Chendong for the rest of his life. General Yi, I'll leave you with 1 million taels of silver. In the future, you'll be paid on time every month. However, I'll leave the matters of the army to you. You must seize the opportunity to train. You must train a strong army so that General Song Quan can rest assured in the underworld. Yang Chendong said earnestly to Yi Ligang. Bugnam of Gojoseon, don't worry. We will train hard, but if you call, we will come. Yi Ligang solemnly promised. After solving the problem of the Liaodong guard post, Yang Chendong brought the 4th Division, 20,000 North Korean soldiers, and 10,000 Baiming surrendered soldiers down south. In just 4 months, after leaving the Japanese Empire, Yang Chendong had taken over the Shuangqing Guards and the Saha River Guards as the front line. He was already halfway to his goal of taking over the Liaodong Guard post. However, Yang Chendong was very clear that although it seemed like he had taken over half of the territory, it was just a barren land. There weren't many Baiming army there either. The truly powerful ones were the remaining half, which was the Liaodong Guard post near the capital of Baiming. Chapter 1146. But no matter what, the initial goal had been achieved. The new supply line had been opened. He had already sent a telegram to order the Korean province to transport the various supplies that had been hoarded over the past few days by sea. Once the supplies arrived at Shur City on the grasslands, it would be even more difficult for anyone to deal with them. When the news of the supply line being opened reached the northern Ming dynasty's court, Zhu Qiyu, the acting patriarch, was truly anxious. Destroying Yang Chendong's arrangements in the grasslands and even uprooting them was what he had been doing for the past year. If he failed to do so, not only would he have wasted more than a year, but it would also greatly affect the morale of the army. Zhu Qiyu definitely did not want to see such a thing happen. Although he was not fully prepared, he still sent an order to the Baiming commander Shi Hang on the grasslands front line. He ordered the Walla army's troops, Yes Hen, to go to Shur City. No matter what, they had to solve the problem before the 5-star army supplies arrived. At the same time, Zhu Qiyu sent someone to quickly inform General Li Tong, who had already sent troops and was about to reach the Liaodong region. In the face of the 5-star army, they had to win and not lose, even if it was a draw. In short, they had to block the main force of the 5-star army in the Liaodong region so that they could not support Grassland City. The emperor gave orders one after another, and the situation in the Liaodong region became extremely tense. On the grasslands, the war was about to break out, and the situation was even more grim. With Su Yozhen's insider, the news about Zhu Qiyu's plan to attack Shur City was quickly sent over via telegram. After the new army's commander, Tiger's Mane, and the mayor, Yu Mian, discussed, they immediately ordered the entire city to be under martial law and to strictly investigate the identity of the people who had recently arrived. As the person in charge of logistics, Yang Si led the soldiers to start planting mines to block the joint attack of the Baiming army and the Walla cavalry. Compared to the slow telegram, the Baiming commander Shi Hang, who had already occupied Toulouse City, only received the news of the emperor's order to send troops on the 4th day. "What are you doing?" "We'll attack immediately. Our army hasn't been fully assembled yet, and our provisions haven't arrived yet." Shi Hang looked at the imperial edict in front of him with dissatisfaction. However, when he saw Zhu Qiyu repeatedly say, "urgent," at the end of the imperial edict, he knew that there were some things that he could not decide. "Forget it. Send out the troops. Order the general at the vanguard to take 20,000 soldiers and leave first. We'll talk about it after we've created some momentum." Shi Hang only did this because he wanted to complete the decree. He wanted to create some momentum to complete his task. However, what he didn't expect was that not long after the vanguard army left Talis City, they were ambushed by a new army before they even reached the beginning city. In just over half a day, the vanguard army was defeated. More than 10,000 people were killed and captured. In the end, only about 50,000 people managed to escape. After being hit in the head, Shi Hang finally calmed down. He knew that in the face of such a powerful opponent like the 5-star army, all kinds of accidents could happen if he was a little careless. Therefore, he suppressed the urge on the imperial edict and nervously contacted Yes Hen, asking him to send troops to cooperate. At the same time, he called back 70,000 Liaodong cavalry and made preparations to attack the beginning city. In the beginning city, the commander of the new army, Tiger's Mane, was cheering for the victory of the first battle. However, after learning about Shi Hang's preparations from the intelligence personnel, he didn't dare to be careless. While doing the strict defense of the city, he sent a telegram to Yang Chendong and reported in detail what had happened here. Yang Chendong, who was rushing to the Twin City Guard, didn't look happy at all after seeing the telegram. Instead, his eyebrows were knitted together again. "Young master, shouldn't Tiger's Mane be happy after winning the battle? Beta Persei, who was following beside him, noticed the change in Yang Qindong and asked with some confusion. Yes, you should be happy after winning the battle. It's just that this first battle has been won. I'm afraid that the next battle won't be so easy. With this lesson, do you think the Baiming army will still underestimate the enemy? Yang Qindong nodded first, then looked at Beta Persei in a rhetorical manner. Beta Persei didn't know how to answer this question. He could only touch his head and chuckle. It's okay, with Tiger's Mane there won't be any problems in the beginning city. I also believe in Tiger's Mane. There won't be any problems in the short term, but it's hard to say after a long time. So we have to speed up, we can't continue to wait. In this way, order the entire army to speed up. Yang Qindong nodded. Although Tiger's Mane had never complained, Yang Qindong could imagine that after not receiving any supplies for more than a year, even if there were some stocks before, there wouldn't be much left now. Under the order of Yang Qindong, the army once again sped up. Meanwhile, at this time, 200 li southwest of their destination, Twin Cities Guard, Northern Ming's 200,000 reinforcements had already arrived, moreover gathering together with Jian Province's left guard General Qindou. Since Tong Long was captured with 3,000 cavalry, Qindula retreated into his shell like a tortoise and never came out again. Even if he could see the scattered 5-star army's cavalry scouts nearby, he still turned a blind eye to them. It wasn't until he heard that the 200,000 reinforcements sent by the emperor had arrived that he hurriedly left the city and brought some provisions and military supplies out. Speaking of which, Qindula and Li Tong were old acquaintances. Although they weren't very close, they could still be considered old friends. When they met again, there was no need to be polite. Perhaps they also knew that they were now grasshoppers on the same rope, and they couldn't run away from each other. General Chen, the situation isn't good. The 5-star army is coming aggressively, I'm afraid it won't be easy to deal with them. After Li Tong greeted Qindula, he entered the temporary tent to discuss the situation in front of him. General Li is right, the 5-star army's combat power is strong and not easy to deal with. To be honest, not long ago, my commander knew that Tong Long wasn't convinced, so he rushed out with 3,000 cavalry, and the result? The result? Li Tong, who had been rushing, didn't know what happened to Tong Long, so he asked out of curiosity. Just as the words left his mouth, Li Tong thought of something. Looking at Qindula's serious and gloomy expression, he already knew the result, so he could only shake his head. I have to say, the Bugnam of Gojoseon is really not easy to deal with. That's right, they have the world's strongest cavalry, and at the same time, they have the world's most powerful firearms. Most importantly, they seem to have endless wealth, and until now, it's difficult to restrict them with money. When Qindula said this, he could only helplessly shake his head. Anyone who had one of these was already very powerful, not to mention all three. With such an opponent, even if you had a lot of troops, you wouldn't be able to gain any advantages. After hearing this, Li Tong was silent for a while, then he raised his head and said, General Chen's words don't necessarily have to boost the morale of others and reduce our own morale. Hee hee. Qindula knew that Li Tong had seen the seriousness of the situation. The reason why he said this was because Li Tong was the main general, and he needed to boost his morale. That was why he said this. For this reason, he decided to give Li Tong some face and didn't expose him. Instead, he asked, General Li, how are you going to deal with the enemy? Are you going to use these 200,000 people to attack and take back everything that you've lost? No. Li Tong quickly shook his head. The opponent is a cavalry team, and in terms of speed, we are no match for them. It's better to defend. Besides, the Emperor's intention is very clear. He wants us to guard here and stop Bugnam of Gojoseon from assisting the Grasslands beginning city. If we do this well, it will be a great achievement. Li Tong was very clear about his position, which made Qindula feel very gratified. General Li is indeed a talented commander. I deeply agree with this. You have to know that Tong Long didn't gain any advantages when he led 3,000 elite cavalry previously. great minds think alike. Li Tong laughed heartily at the sky after hearing that. Using a defensive battle to hold back Bugnam of Gojoseon's army and prevent them from assisting the beginning city. This was the plan that Li Tong had set for the 200,000 troops. If the truth was really like what he did, it could indeed give Yang Qindong a headache. Although it would definitely not be able to block it, it could play the role of stalling for time. In this way, the beginning city would be in danger. The policy was right, but in the end, it still depended on who carried it out. Just like the laws and governments issued by many countries, they were all for the purpose of the people. However, when it was really in the hands of the people, it might be completely different. Just like now, Tong Long, who they were just talking about, had now returned to the Jian province left guard and met his own people here. In the Jian province left guard, in terms of population, although the Han people were more than the Nuzanren, in terms of overall strength, especially influence, the Nuzanren was not just a little bit stronger. This might have something to do with the Nuzanren being more united than the Han people, or perhaps it was because they had lived in this area for generations, allowing them to adapt better to the environment here. In short, the Nuzanren's influence in the Jian province left guard was far greater than that of the Han people. Even the commander, Chindola, had to act according to her mood. Not to mention that Chindola was not in the city now. It was just a small matter of quietly entering the city, so Tong Long naturally did it. Not only did he enter the city, but he also met his father, Tong Sheng, a burly man who was taller than an ordinary person. When Tong Sheng was young, he was definitely a person who could tremble with a stomp of his feet in this area. In addition, he had the support of a group of old brothers, so he had done a lot of things. For example, the nearby caravans must pay the toll to them. Otherwise, their safety could not be guaranteed. It was also because Tong Sheng did not understand the Han culture. Otherwise, with his economic strength and influence, he would have long become a general among the Baiming generals. In the end, the things that the old man couldn't do were handed over to his son. Fortunately, Tong Long lived up to expectations. With the support of his family, he finally walked to the position of commander and became a secondary grade 3 military officer. Chapter 1147. With Tong Long's good performance, Tong Sheng was like a tiger that had grown wings. In the big city of the Jianzhou left guard, there was no one who dared to not give him face. However, all of this changed when Tong Long and his 3,000 elite cavalrymen suddenly disappeared. Tong Sheng and Tong Long were father and son. One was a businessman while the other was an official. When one of them was missing, the problem naturally arose. The cake was only so big, and most of it was still controlled by the Tong family. Now that there was finally a chance to redistribute it, who would give up this opportunity? During this period of time, the Tong family had become the target of public criticism. They had become the target of everyone's attacks, both openly and secretly. Even Chandula, as the commander, had begun to take sides, as if he wanted to help another family rise in the city. The Tong clan's days became harder and harder, and they were getting worse day by day. At this moment, Tong Long suddenly appeared in front of his father, which made Tong Sheng extremely excited. "My son, you're back. Huh, that's great. Let's see who dares to make things difficult for our Tong family this time." Tong Sheng, who had always been expressionless, actually had such a reaction after seeing his son. Just from this point alone, one could see how much pressure he had been under during this period of time and how difficult his days had been. "Father, I'm unfilial. I've had a bad start." Tong Long knelt in front of Tong Sheng and lowered his proud head. "Don't say that. Victory and defeat are common in war. It's good that you're back, it's good that you're back. How about this, you can immediately go to the Yamen and restore your official position first." Tong Sheng knew that Chandula was not in the city, so he decided to restore his son's official position first and properly intimidate the other opponents in the open and in the dark. Looking at his father's wrinkled face, Tong Long swallowed his saliva first, then said in a calm voice, "Father, I can't go to the Yamen." "Why? Is it because you lost the battle?" "It's fine, didn't I say? Victory and defeat are common in war. Besides, Who really won against the 5-star army? It's fine, we can just spend more money. After operating in the Jianghu left-guard city for decades, Tong Xing still had some family assets. Naturally, his words were more forceful. Money? How much money do we have now? Speaking of this matter, Tong Long was also very curious. He only knew that the family had some extra money, but he really did not ask how much it was. It wasn't that he was ambitious, but that he didn't have any needs in this aspect. Speaking of this matter, Tong Xing's face burst out into a smile like a blooming flower. Son, you've finally grown up. You know how much money we have at home. If others asked me like this, I wouldn't tell them. However, I will hand it over to you in the future. Therefore, I won't hide it from you. Listen, we've saved 300,000 taels of silver. It's not a problem for us to restore your official position with this money. 300,000 taels was undoubtedly an astronomical figure in the eyes of ordinary people. Didn't Zhongcheng kill Song Yong for 100,000 taels of silver? In the end, he was beheaded and separated from his family. Looking at his father's proud appearance, Tong Long did not feel the slightest bit of joy. Instead, he sighed. His father had worked hard for so many years, and after operating for so many years, he only managed to save 300,000 taels of silver. Yet, he was already so happy. He didn't know if he should say that it was a kind of sorrow. In front of his father, Tong Long revealed a calm expression. His right hand slowly reached into his pocket, and then he easily took out 500,000 taels of silver. Father, what do you think this is? Silver? Tong Xing's eyes weren't blurry and he recognized the item in front of him at first glance. When he took a closer look, he realized that it was Yang Xie's 500,000 taels of silver. When he realized that it could be exchanged at any Yang family bank, his eyes widened. Where did this come from? Of course it was given to me by the 5-star army. I won't hide it from father. I am now a member of the 5-star army. Because of my outstanding strength and outstanding performance, I am now a company commander. Of course, I am confident that I can lead more troops in the future. When he spoke of this, Tong Long's arrogant side appeared again. Ever since Tong Long was captured by Commander Bai Shuang, he couldn't accept it. When he woke up and ate a large amount of food, he started to shout loudly. What he meant was that he couldn't accept it. If it wasn't for the 5-star army's strategy that caused them to be exhausted, he definitely had the ability to fight it out and even win. Logically speaking, a captive shouldn't have the right to speak. Even in ancient times, such people didn't even have basic human rights. However, Bai Shuang didn't take away his right to shout. On the contrary, he got someone to release him. Not only him, the other 2,000+ captives were also released. They were surrounded by 4 groups of 2,000 soldiers. The only difference was that one group had weapons and war horses while the other group had nothing. What are they doing? Are they trying to kill us? Since that's the case, we will fight it out with them. We don't have any weapons. Even if we bite with our teeth and tear with our hands, we can't just sit there and wait for death. Seeing their 2,000+ men being surrounded by the 5-star army's 2,000 cavalry, many of their faces changed greatly. Some of them were already prepared to fight to the death. It had to be said that although Tong Long lost this time, the soldiers he brought still had some backbone. If it was a normal army, they would have already knelt down and begged for mercy under such circumstances. Naturally, there were also people who were calm in the crowd, such as Tong Long. He didn't believe that the other party would kill them. If that was the case, there would be no need for such a formation. Wouldn't it be better to just kill them one by one? Releasing all of them was a kind of danger in itself. Of course, it was also a kind of attitude. He didn't believe that the 5-star army didn't even have a bit of common sense. Therefore, at this moment, he wasn't nervous at all. Instead, he squinted his eyes and looked at Bai Shuang, who was wearing a black cloak. He wanted to see what the other party was up to. Just as Tong Long expected, Bai Shuang didn't give the order to kill the captives. There were so many young men with good riding skills. Most of them were Han. If he killed them just like that, even his teacher wouldn't let him off. The reason why he had brought all these people out was because he wanted to use his powerful force to subdue them. Therefore, he opened his mouth and said, "You don't have to be afraid. We don't want to kill you. We just want to prove that we are stronger than you." Oh right, didn't someone say that they weren't convinced? Alright, we will give them a chance to show off now. No matter if it's one-on-one or many-on-many, we will accept it. But if you lose this time, please put down your pride. Oh right, since it's a bet, there should be some stakes. How about this, if you can win, we will let you go unconditionally. On the other hand, if you lose, you must stay and join the 5-star army. How about it? Are you serious? The moment Bai Shuang finished speaking, Tong Long was the first to ask. Of course. There are so many brothers here. How can this be a game? Plus, we always keep our words in the army. You don't have to doubt us, Bai Shuang said in an incomparably confident tone. This time, the army camp was in an uproar. This was especially true for some of the men who were confident in their strength. They had always been fearless. Now that they had a chance to prove themselves, how could they let it go? Immediately, many people began to take the initiative to sign up. They wanted to prove themselves with their own strength and also to save themselves. Bai Shuang didn't reject these people. He ordered people to bring over the war horses that were captured before. Then, he gave everyone who wanted to fight a wooden scimitar. This was originally the weapon that the 1st Cavalry Division used to train. With such a weapon, they didn't have to worry about killing people. At most, they would only suffer some minor injuries. The first to fight were the 100 captives. Their opponents were the 100 cavalry warriors of the 4th Regiment. In front of everyone, the two sides pulled apart a distance of 2 li. Then, under the shout of Bai Shuang, the temporary referee, both sides began to exert their strength and charged at each other. It had to be said that the cavalry that caught Tong Long's eye and brought out were quite strong. They charged from afar, waving their wooden scimitars and doing all kinds of difficult tricks on the horses. Loud battle cries came from their mouths. Their imposing manner was extraordinary. In comparison, the 100 soldiers of the 4th Regiment seemed to be weaker. They didn't shout or shout. Instead, they kept moving forward in silence. As they moved forward, they kept changing their formation. The 100 people quickly formed a formation of 5 tip of the arrow. Then, they collided with the 100 captives in a way that could pierce through their hearts. 1 chopstick was easily broken. 10 chopsticks couldn't be broken. When the two sides began to collide, the tip of the arrow array displayed its unique and powerful strength. Under the coordination of each other, the soldiers of the 4th Regiment only needed to take care of the enemies in front of them. As for their left, right, and back, there were naturally other comrades in charge of protecting them. This allowed them to maximize their attacking power. On the contrary, the captives were fighting for themselves. Those who had a good relationship with each other only cooperated in 2s and 3s. In the face of the tip of the arrow, which was a group of 20, it was no different from a mantis trying to stop a chariot. In just one exchange, a quarter of the 100 captives fell. Then, it was time to charge again and again, entangling the enemy. Soon, the captives realized that every time they attacked with their scimitars, they could only attack one opponent. However, there would often be multiple scimitars slashing at them. Moreover, it was continuous. One move after another, it was impossible to guard against. Chapter 1148. Under the relentless attacks, more and more captive soldiers were cut down by the wooden scimitars and fell off their horses. In less than half an hour, all 100 captive soldiers had fallen off their horses. On the other hand, only 2 of the 4 groups of soldiers had fallen off their horses. Moreover, they had only been hit on the arms and were not seriously injured. In comparison, the difference in strength was obvious. The captive soldiers who were clamoring to teach the 5-star army a lesson all lowered their heads. Only now did they realize that even if the enemy did not use any tricks, they would still be the ones to lose in a direct battle. Tong Long saw everything with his eyes. When he saw the 5-star army working together so closely, he revealed an envious expression. It could not be helped. Tong Long was an all-rounder. It was not that he had never thought of using cavalry to fight together, but the soldiers under him were all arrogant and unruly. In addition, they had not met any worthy opponents. It was too difficult to gather them together for training. No matter what, the 5-star army had taught them a lesson. Seeing this, many of the captive soldiers were already convinced. However, as their commander, Tong Long naturally would not be so easily convinced. Seeing that no one stood out to challenge him, he held the wooden scimitar in his hand and said to Bai Shuang, who was wearing a black cloak, "You should be the commander of these people. Since that is the case, I will challenge you. Do you dare to accept?" "Hee, I have already lost to you once. Why should I be afraid of you?" Bai Shuang laughed loudly as he spurred his horse forward. For safety reasons, he did not hold his spear. Instead, he held a pair of wooden scimitars and rode out on his horse. Dual blades? Seeing Bai Shuang come out with dual blades, Tong Long was stunned at first. Then, he laughed loudly. It seemed that dual blades were naturally more powerful than a single blade. However, this was a battle on horseback. If one was not careful and did not control his strength well, he would fall off the horse. Was he not afraid of such a problem with dual blades? "What? Are you afraid? Or should I give you a blade?" Bai Shuang smiled lightly. He did not show any displeasure because of the other party's mockery. "There is no need for that. But let me remind you, with dual blades in hand, you won't have the chance to control your warhorse. I'm very strong, so don't blame me if I knock you off your horse." Tong Long had never used dual blades before, so he naturally wouldn't do that. However, for the sake of a fair battle, he could not help but remind White Shuang. Little did he know that in order to become a soldier of the 1st Cavalry Division, the first thing one needed to do was to learn how to use dual blades. Without this ability, one would never be able to enter the division. As the leader of one of the regiments, although White Shuang's dual blade techniques were not the best, he was still stronger than ordinary warriors. He had this confidence. "Thanks for the reminder. Can we begin?" Bai Shuang said nonchalantly. "All right, you have to be careful." Seeing that White Shuang was still holding dual blades and had no intention of changing, Tong Long snorted coldly and urged his horse forward. Although he was still a distance away, he waved his blade several times. It was obvious that he was preparing for the final battle. It was often seen in movies or TV series that when cavalry charged, they would habitually wave their weapons while still a distance away. This was not to show off, but to brace themselves. This was to maximize the strength of their bodies. This way, they would be able to maximize their strength when fighting with their opponents. Like Tong Long, White Shuang had already raised his dual blades and shouted loudly. He did not have any intention of underestimating Tong Long. This was also Yang Chendong's request for them. Even when facing the weakest opponent, they had to give their all. Only then would they be able to remain undefeated. The wind and the crane were jittery. At this moment, even the wind seemed to have stopped. It was just watching the battle between the two warriors, waiting for the result of the battle. Dang, dang, dang. The distance of 2 li was covered in the blink of an eye. Soon, the two of them collided. Then, the sound of weapons clashing rang out. Every time there was a loud bang, the two of them would involuntarily move. They were releasing all the power that the other party had imbued into their bodies through their weapons. Although they were holding wooden scimitars, the two of them were playing with them as if they were made of iron. In a short period of time, the two of them had exchanged no less than 20 rounds, and there was still no clear winner. Tong Long was indeed a fierce general. His blade skills were strong and powerful, and the strength in his body was endless. It gave people the feeling that he was an unending mountain. On the other hand, Bai Shuang was able to become Yang Chendong's student and was appointed as the commander of the strongest cavalry, the 1st Cavalry Division's 4th Regiment. His strength was not ordinary either. After exchanging 20 moves, his expression did not change and his heart was not panting. It was obvious that he had not used his full strength. Tian, who was the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. Under his strict requirements, as long as the conditions allowed, every cavalry soldier would swing their blades at least 1,000 times a day. Even in between battles, this rule had never changed. With this kind of hard training, swinging their blades seemed to have become an instinct. Every time they swung their blades, they would need to use their full strength. However, it was only 20 moves, which was equivalent to an adult man running about 5 meters. It was really nothing. 30 rounds. 40 rounds. 50 rounds. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had exchanged nearly 60 rounds. Under the situation where they used all their strength, the scales of victory began to tilt. Tong Long, who was originally full of fighting spirit, began to feel weak. Although Tong Long also trained regularly, especially on horseback, the training time was not short. However, compared to Bai Shuang's training time, it was still a little short. The main difference was that they lacked a training atmosphere. For example, why did many outstanding soldiers' physical fitness begin to decline after they retired from the army? Even if they did not exercise when they returned home, why was it the same? Speaking of this, it had to be the environment, which was the element of atmosphere. When they were in the army, they had many comrades to accompany them. While they were chasing each other and could not slack off, training also became a kind of work and interest. However, when they were alone, it was completely different. Without a comparison, they might involuntarily want to rest for a while when they were tired. As time passed, naturally, the gap between them would become bigger and bigger. It was precisely because Tong Long did not have such a good environment that he could match Bai Shuang in a short period of time. However, as time passed, the disadvantage became more and more obvious. This was especially so after 50 rounds when White Shuang used 2 swords. Under the continuous attacks, he could only defend himself and could not attack. When all the soldiers who were watching saw this, they could basically see the outcome of the battle. Some of the captives who had placed their hopes on General Tong Long had no choice but to lower their heads. Even the strongest person on their side was not a match for the other party. How could they fight this battle? Sure enough, it was as everyone expected. In the 65th round, Tong Long, who had been bitterly defending, finally revealed a flaw. Because his blade was not fast enough, the hole in his chest was wide open. Using this opportunity, Bai Shuang chopped down and hit him in the chest. If Bai Shuang had not held back, just this attack alone would not have taken his life, but at least a few of his ribs would have been broken. With a plop, Tong Long finally fell off his horse. When he fell to the ground, he was still panting heavily. It could be felt that the battle just now had exhausted him. Swoosh! A wooden blade accurately pressed 30 centimeters in front of Tong Long's throat. Then, Bai Shuang's voice sounded, "You lost." "Yes, I lost. I am willing to repay my loss. I want to join your 5-star army." "I don't know if that is possible." Tong Long did not have the dispirited appearance of a loser. On the contrary, although he was still panting heavily and his chest was heaving up and down, his eyes were shining brightly. Clearly, he felt that he had found the direction of his life. Seeing that Tong Long was not discouraged after being defeated, Bai Shuang chuckled and sheathed his saber. "Of course, the 5-star army welcomes anyone with insight and ability to join. I think we will be comrades in the future." Bai Shuang had accepted Tong Long, and this made the other captives see hope as well. Immediately, there were many who wanted to join the 5-star army, and the seemingly dangerous competition ended with a unanimous decision. Because of this, the 5-star army had an additional 2,000 cavalrymen. Among them, there were at least 1,000 of them who were elites. What they lacked was the corresponding training. Once they understood how to cooperate in battle, there was no doubt that they would be a strong army. Just like that, Tong Long joined the 5-star army. He was even appointed as a company commander by Bai Shuang. He led 100 elite cavalrymen under him. This time, he was the one who requested to return to the Jian province left guard. He wanted to perform meritorious deeds. A company commander was not enough to satisfy him. He wanted to take over the Jian province left guard and give it to Bugnam of Gojoseon as a gift. After seriously listening to his son's story, Tong Xing really did not know what to say at this moment. Although he had seen the problems of corruption in the Great Ming Dynasty and the bitter lives of the people, the Great Ming Dynasty was still the Great Ming Dynasty. They had a population of 60 million and an army of millions. Such a huge force would undoubtedly be the best target to rely on. But now, his son had chosen Bugnam of Gojoseon, who was the enemy of the Great Ming Dynasty. It was simply unrealistic and impossible for him to immediately express his support. Tong Xing stood there for a long time without saying anything. Tong Long guessed his father's thoughts and knew that there were some things that needed to be said. This was because without his father's support, his plan could not be completed. He immediately said, "Father, you know about the Japanese Empire, right? Now, he has completely submitted to Bugnam of Gojoseon. In the future, there will be no Japanese Empire. There will only be the Japanese province. It will become a part of Bugnam of Gojoseon's territory. Father, I'm afraid you still don't know. Bugnam of Gojoseon has already taken over Terran City. Among them, Commander Song Quan committed suicide, Commander Tongji Zhongcheng was killed, and Commander Yi Ligang became a general in the 5-star army. Bugnam of Gojoseon has already given the order to change the Liaodong region into the 3 eastern provinces. Yi Ligang has also become the first general of the 3 eastern provinces. Chapter 1149. Right now, Wunan King is leading his army towards us. Do you think that we can stop them with just our strength? If we don't make the right choice now, I'm afraid Song Quan and Zhongcheng will be our examples, Father. The information was like a huge wave hitting Tong Xing's heart, causing his expression to change again and again. First, it was because of the isolation of information. For the sake of the overall situation, it was difficult for unfavorable news to spread to the city. Secondly, in the social environment at that time, many things often took a long time to be known by everyone. Therefore, Tong Xing had never heard of these things that his son said. After hearing this for the first time, he was inexplicably shocked. What kind of people were the Japanese Empire? Perhaps the people in the hinterland of the Great Ming Dynasty didn't know much about them, but as the Jianzhou left guard in the Liaodong region, Tong Xing, who was in business, knew very well. When he was transporting goods, he saw the Japanese Empire invading the border with his own eyes. He saw many Han people and Nuzanren die tragically in their hands. As for the strength of Song Quan and the others, he was even more clear. As the commander of the entire Liaodong region in name, Song Quan was still very prestigious among the people. But he didn't expect these people to be forced to commit suicide. Thinking about how it had only been 4 months since the 5-star army appeared here, how could he not be surprised? Just how powerful was the 5-star army? How could they attack a city in such a short period of time as if they were invincible? If such a powerful army really set their sights on the Jianzhou left guard, would they be able to hold on? As the saying goes, those who recognize the times are wise. To be able to rely on a pair of hands to fight from nothing to now, Tong Xing relied on the right choice. Now he had another chance to choose. His son was already an officer in the 5-star army. Although he was only a company commander and didn't have much power, it was still a start. At this time, as a father, how could he go against his son? After listening to this, Tong Xing's mentality had undergone a huge change. What he didn't expect was that Tong Long's next words were like a heavy hammer that strengthened his conviction. Father, Captain Baishuang has already asked for instructions from Bugnam of Gojoseon and gave a detailed introduction of our family's situation. Bugnam of Gojoseon has promised that as long as the Tong family can successfully take over the Jianzhou left guard, we will be allowed to do business here in the future. Father, you have to know that the 5-star army sells rare goods. Once you purchase goods from them, you will definitely make a profit. This will only be beneficial to the future development of our Tong family. At that time, one of us will be in business while the other will be in the military. Wouldn't that be the best way to help each other? Father, why are you still hesitating? Please help your son. In a short period of time, Tong Long had revealed all of his trump cards. He even deliberately played with the banknotes worth 500,000 taels of silver in his hand. That was more money than Tong Xing's lifetime of hard work. Finally, Tong Long's expression changed several times before he nodded heavily and made a decision. All right, since Bugnam of Gojoseon thinks so highly of us, son, father agrees to help you. Tell me, what do you need me to do? The father and son discussed together for more than 2 hours. Afterwards, Tong Xing stepped forward and invited all of the influential people in Jianghu left guard city to the Tong residence. Not long after all of the influential people in the military, politics, and business arrived at the Tong residence, they were all surrounded by hundreds of elite soldiers. On one side was a mountain of silver, on the other side was the consequence of shaking their heads and refusing. No one was stupid enough to not know what to choose. The Jianzhou left guard changed sides in this lifeless situation. After controlling the situation, Tong Long personally went out of the city to welcome Captain Bai Shuang and his 4,000 men. After the army entered the city, the Baiming army in the city quickly gave up resistance and became a member of the 5-star army. When the news spread and reached the military camp more than 200 miles away, Chandula, who was still discussing the plan with General Li Tong, was stunned on the spot. He did not expect such a big thing to happen just because he was not in the city. Naturally, Chandula was also glad. If he was not in the city, he would also be faced with a choice and might even lose his head. This is outrageous. Chandula angrily slammed his right fist on the desk in front of him. Even though his fist was bleeding, he did not care at all. General Li Tong's face was also full of shock and disbelief. He quickly reacted and asked in surprise, General Chen, our army's rations seem to be in the city, right? Could it be? Ah! A howl came from the tent. If one listened carefully, it was Chandula's howl. Due to the urgency of the situation, Li Tong's army of 200,000 only brought a small amount of rations. Other than Baiming capital, who was working hard to prepare, the main logistics work was left to Chandula. For this reason, he ordered all the rations and extra weapons to be gathered in the Jianzhou left guard. Not only that, he also collected taxes from the merchants and civilians in advance. After all, in front of the 5-star army cavalry that liked to fight, there was no place safer than the Jianzhou left guard. It was just that no one had expected such a thing to happen so suddenly. Now, all the rations were used by the 5-star army. It was a huge loss. Chandula reacted quickly after the howl. He reached out and grabbed Li Tong and said, General Li, the rations and supplies are in the city. We have to get them back. We should take action now that the 5-star army hasn't stabilized. Otherwise, we won't have a chance. Li Tong naturally knew the importance of the rations. If they couldn't get them back, his army of 200,000 would only have 5 days of rations. At that time, the morale of the army would be shaken even before Bugnam of Gojoseon did anything. Okay, I'll immediately send troops to the Jianzhou left guard. No matter what, we have to get this city back. After an emergency meeting, Li Tong gave Chandula 30,000 soldiers and hurried to the Jianzhou left guard. Li Tong followed behind with the remaining 100,000 soldiers. No matter what, they had to get the Jianzhou left guard back. They also had to get the rations and supplies back in their hands. In the Jianzhou left guard city, Commander Bai Shuang sat at the head of the table. Looking at the situation in the city sent by his subordinates, he rubbed his forehead with a headache. Even Bai Shuang didn't expect that he would get so much rations and supplies just because he wanted to occupy the Jianzhou left guard city and find a safe place for his teacher who was about to arrive. This sudden turn of events made Bai Shuang's face flash with joy, but at the same time, she became worried. He knew that the Baiming army wouldn't leave so many things in their hands. It was very likely that they had already received the news and sent troops here. Come, quickly inform the division commanders and report the situation here. Commander Tong, please immediately summon all the surrendered Baiming army soldiers to the city. I want to talk to them. Elder Tong, I'll have to trouble you to do some logistics work. There is a lot of rations in the city. You can take as much as you want, but you must ensure that the soldiers have 3 meals a day. Is that okay? Orders were given one after another. At this moment, Bai Shuang took on the role of a division commander. He changed from a horse attack to a battle of defending the city. Everything happened so suddenly, but he really had no choice. If he didn't have a choice, then so be it. At this moment, Bai Shuang's eyes were shining. Wasn't it what he had always wanted to be able to command so many people to fight a battle of defending the city? He wanted to prove to everyone that as Yang Qindong student, he could not only kill the enemy immediately, but he could also be an excellent infantry soldier who defended the city even if he dismounted from his horse. The so-called so many people naturally didn't refer to how many people Bai Shuang had brought this time. It meant that there were many infantry soldiers in the Jianghu Left Guard City. The Jianghu Left Guard City belonged to the Guard Command Division and had 5,600 soldiers. This time, only 600 soldiers followed the commander Chen Do out of the city. Excluding the 2,000 soldiers Tong Long had brought with him, there were still 3,000 infantry soldiers in the city. With 3,000 infantrymen, 2,000 men from Bai Shuang's 4 regiments, and 2,500 captives, they had a total of 8,000 soldiers. Furthermore, they were defending the city, so it wasn't necessarily impossible for them to fight. Furthermore, he didn't need to eliminate the enemy. As long as he waited for Division Commander Tianhu to bring the main force of the division to reinforce them, all the problems would be easily solved. He had learned many things from Yang Qindong, and one of them was confidence. Using his teacher's words, confidence might not guarantee victory, but without confidence, one would definitely lose. After arranging everything, Bai Shuang felt that it was about time. He led the 5-star army out of the residence and arrived at the city gates. There were already thousands of Baiming soldiers gathered here. They stood densely together, and their faces were filled with confusion. They had already surrendered to the 5-star army. They didn't understand why they were gathered here so quickly. Considering that everyone's weapons had been confiscated, some people were worried. They were afraid that the 5-star army would suddenly turn hostile. If that was the case, then wouldn't they be at the mercy of others? As such, many people turned their gaze to General Tong Long, who was commanding the troops. From their point of view, he should be one of them, so he wouldn't be too ruthless. Not long after, Bai Shuang led a group of elite cavalry and arrived at the city gates. He only took a quick glance before walking up the city gate tower. When he could see everything below, he stopped and raised his right hand. Following this action, the 3,000 Baiming army below the city gate tower became very quiet. Seeing that everyone was so obedient, a smile flashed across Bai Shuang's face. He then looked into the distance and saw that Tong Sheng had already gathered many civilians to watch. On the other side, large pots had been set up, and pieces of delicious fatty meat were thrown into the pots. Chapter 1150. Now that everything was ready, Bai Shuang's voice came down from the city gate tower. Soldiers, I've called everyone here today to tell you that the Jianghu Left Guard is now under the control of the 5-star army, and you will soon become a member of the 5-star army. Our 5-star army belongs to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Bugnam of Gojoseon never mistreats his subordinates, so after asking for instructions, we've decided to give each soldier 5 taels of silver. The amount is the same, so please don't think it's too little. Alright, now everyone can line up to get the silver. Elder Tong, I'll have to trouble you. No problem, it's already prepared. Tong Sheng, who already knew about Bai Shuang's plan, smiled. Then, he gave an order and the wooden boxes placed there were opened. White light flashed, and boxes of silver were placed in front of everyone. Wow, so much silver. Yes, I've never seen so much silver in my life. Shouts of surprise continued. When a large amount of silver was placed in front of them, the impact was still very strong. Alright, everyone, don't just sigh. The silver is only real when it's in your hands. Now, please line up and get the silver. Of course, I want to say that from the moment you receive the silver, you will be a glorious soldier of the 5-star army. If anyone is unwilling, you can leave now. I promise that no one will make things difficult for you. Bai Shuang seemed to be talking about a very ordinary matter. But these words were not the case in the ears of the soldiers. What a joke, who would refuse money? As for whether they were in the 5-star army or the Biming army, what difference did it make? As long as they were given money and treated well, they would listen to them and work for them. Most of the soldiers of the Great Ming Dynasty were formed from military families. In other words, their fathers were military families, and most of their sons would become soldiers when they grew up. This was originally set by the Great Ming Dynasty's Emperor Taizu because he was afraid that there would be no soldiers to recruit. Therefore, after a long period of habit, these people had already accepted the fact that they had to be paid as soldiers. As for whether or not they would go to war after becoming soldiers, and who they would fight against, that was not something they could consider or choose. Usually, the soldiers of the Biming army were only paid 2 taels of silver a month. Even so, there were times when they couldn't even get paid. Now that each person could receive 5 taels of silver in cash, no one would refuse such a good deal. Bai Shuang looked around and saw that none of the 3,000 people left on their own accord. They all obediently lined up to receive their silver. 3,000 people, 5 taels per person. That would be 15,000 taels of silver. This amount of money was really nothing to Bai Shuang. In his opinion, it was worth it to pay such a small price to defend the city. Even if his teacher knew about this matter, he would only praise him for being capable. There were a total of 10 teams, and everything was over in less than an hour. When Bai Shuang saw that all the soldiers had smiles on their faces with the silver in their hands, he continued, "Congratulations, everyone. You are now a member of the 5-star army. I just want to say that there will be many more good things like this in the future. As long as you work hard on the battlefield, you will receive more than this. Everyone, are you happy?" Happy. The soldiers who had just received their silver naturally stood in front of Bai Shuang and replied loudly. Very good. Bai Shuang saw that everyone had fallen into his trap, so he laughed and said, "Soldiers of the 5-star army, to tell you the truth, the Biming army will soon arrive at the city. They will most likely prepare to attack the city. In other words, your opportunity to perform has arrived." What? Are we really going to fight? Yes, or are we going to fight the Biming army? We are the Biming army, aren't we? Biming army my ass. We are now captives of the 5-star army. Captives, do you understand? We have no choice but to fight for power. What? Now that we have received our silver, we are no longer captives. We are now members of the 5-star army. Because of this sentence, the soldiers below began to discuss. In the end, Bai Shuang raised his right hand and calmed the crowd down. Soldiers, I know that you may have some thoughts. But what I want to say is that you have already surrendered to the 5-star army. It doesn't matter if you did it willingly or not, but it is the truth. At least, the Biming army outside the city will think this way. Once the city is breached, it will be the time of your death. I don't think anyone will be merciful to soldiers who have surrendered to the enemy. Therefore, the next battle will be fought for your own sake. Seeing how certain Bai Shuang was, some soldiers who didn't want to die opened their mouths and said, We were only forced. Is that so? Bai Shuang had already expected this result. He smiled and said, But when you took the silver, you were very proactive. Everyone in the city saw it. Indeed, Bai Shuang didn't force anyone. When they took the silver, they all did it willingly. They were all very excited and happy. After he finished speaking, some of the Biming soldiers who wanted to argue shut their mouths. Using this opportunity, Bai Shuang's expression suddenly changed as he said, You think you were forced, but will the Biming army think this way? Will the generals think this way? They will only think of you as the real 5-star army. Then, they will kill you and chop off your heads to give them rewards. As soon as he said this, the soldiers below were all shocked. Biming rewarded soldiers based on military merits, and military merits were closely related to the enemy's head. When that time came, no one would be able to tell whether they were the 5-star army or the Biming army. Seeing that everyone was silent, Bai Shuang smiled in his heart. He knew that his plan had succeeded. He had given them the stick, and now it was time to give them the carrot. He immediately said in a loud voice, "Soldiers, whether you are willing or not, the truth can't be changed. Since we are all going to war, why not help the 5-star army? You should know that what we are giving you is much more than what the Biming army gave you. Everyone can turn around and look. On your left, there is a burning cauldron. There is a lot of delicious food inside, and everyone can eat until they are full. On your right, there are countless boxes that haven't been opened yet. There is an uncountable amount of silver inside. As long as you achieve military merits on the battlefield, you can immediately come and collect it. These are things that the Biming army can't give you. What is there to hesitate about? A person's life was nothing more than wearing clothes and eating food. Those who joined the military only wanted to live a better life and rely on their own efforts to obtain more glory. Now that Bai Shuang had given them all, there was nothing to worry about. Many soldiers were shocked by what they saw. Even if they worked hard for the Biming army, they wouldn't be able to eat their fill. Sometimes, they wouldn't even get paid on time. But now, not only could they eat their fill, but they also had enough meat. If they obtained military merits, they would be directly rewarded with silver. Under these conditions, it was very easy for them to make a choice. While most of the people were already tempted, there were still a small number of people who were hesitating. One of them shouted loudly in the crowd, "General, how can you guarantee that we will be given money if we make military contributions?" Bai Shuang didn't answer this question. With his status, it was useless to say anything. Thus, he looked at Tong Long, who was already a company commander. "I can answer this question. I can guarantee it on behalf of the Tong family." Tong Long spoke up in a timely manner. With his influence, no one doubted his words. Thus, no one objected. Instead, everyone started arguing about who would be the first to defend the city. To be honest, everyone was afraid of death. But from the day they became soldiers, they no longer had a choice. All they wanted was to obtain the treatment they deserved after obtaining military merits. Now, the opportunity was right in front of them. Bai Shuang also said that no matter who died in battle, the 5-star army would give their family 20 taels of silver. Based on this, why wouldn't they fight with their lives on the line? If they died, they could leave something for their family. If they didn't die, they would have a boundless future. This was something they didn't even dare to think about in the past. The reason why Bai Shuang gave these soldiers 20 taels of silver was because many of them were Han people. If they were from other races, 10 taels of silver would be the most they could get. From this, it could be seen that in times of war, the most worthless thing was probably human life. The Jian province left guard was fully prepared. Under Bai Shuang's leadership, everything was carried out in an orderly manner. Kerosene, rolling wood, bows, and arrows were all carried up the city gate tower. This was also thanks to Chandula's command department. Originally, these things were prepared to be used to deal with the 5-star army. Now, Bai Shuang and the others had benefited from it. Outside the city, Chandula was quickly approaching with an army of 30,000. Obviously, this command department wanted to use the time difference to catch the Jian province left guard off guard and take back everything they had lost. However, when he arrived at the city gate tower and saw that the colorful 5-star flag had already been placed on the city gate tower, and his former soldiers were all ready for battle, he had a very bad feeling in his heart. The other party was already prepared. It was obviously impossible to launch a surprise attack. Chengdu had no choice but to take a step back and settle for the next best thing. He was prepared to persuade these soldiers who were originally loyal to him. If they were willing to pledge allegiance to him again, it would be very easy to take down the Jianzhou left guard by cooperating from the inside and outside. Riding a warhorse, under the protection of a dozen bodyguards, Chandula arrived at the city gate tower. He raised his head and looked at his former soldiers standing majestically on the battlements. He shouted loudly, soldiers, I am Chandula. I am your commander. Now, I order you to open the city gate. Chapter 1151. His voice was not soft, but he was met with silence. How could the Baiming army soldiers, who had been convinced and successfully tempted by Bai Shuang, betray him just because of a few words? What's wrong? Don't you understand what I'm saying? I've treated you well all these years. Hurry up and open the city gate. Otherwise, once I lead the army into the city, none of you will be spared. Even your families will be implicated. Is that what you want to see? Chandula saw that his order was ignored, so he angrily threatened them. Needless to say, this shout did have some effect. For the ordinary Baiming soldiers, Chandula had always been a superior existence. They had to carefully ponder the words of such a person. Although Bai Shuangshu had given them a lot of benefits, if the Jianzhou left guard was defeated, these benefits would be gone. This was something they didn't dare to think about. In a corner of the city gate tower, Bai Shuang was watching Chandula's act. When he saw that the other party was even threatening him, he could not help but coldly snort. Then, he said to a soldier beside him, "Pass down the order. It's time to teach this commander a lesson." The order flag on the city gate tower was waved. Immediately, the west gate of the Jian province left guard was opened. When the thick and heavy city gate creaked, Chandula, who still wanted to continue his threats, immediately smiled. "Ha, can't we talk nicely? Why do I have to scare you? Sigh, these soldiers are really despicable." After these words came out of his mouth, Chandula suddenly widened his eyes. Then, without any scruples, he turned around and fled. He had already seen that the people who came out of the city gate were not ordinary Baiming soldiers, but thousands of cavalrymen led by Tong Long. The Jian province left guard was easily taken down by the 5-star army because of Tong Long. Chandula already knew about this. Now that he saw this person riding out, how could he not know what was going to happen? Considering that this person had always been very brave, and even Chandula was no match for him in a one-on-one fight, if not now, when would he be able to escape? Just as Chandula turned to flee, so anxious that he didn't even notify his personal guards, Tong Long had already led his 25,000 cavalry out of the west gate. At this moment, Tong Long had already been appointed as a battalion commander by Bai Shuang, and the cavalry that originally belonged to him had been returned to him. This kind of trust and use made Tong Long shed tears of gratitude. He swore in his heart that he would definitely perform well. Therefore, at this moment, he rushed out with all his might. If Chandula had not seen the situation and fled quickly, he might have really been left behind by him. Although Chandula managed to escape, it was a pity that he only brought a dozen men with him. Apart from 2 of them who managed to escape quickly, the rest of them were all captured. One of them even tried to hold Tong Long back by relying on his martial strength, but was beheaded with a single slash. His goal was not to scare Chandula away. Using this opportunity to leave the city, Tong Long led his 2,500 cavalry and charged straight at the 30,000 Baiming army that were completely unprepared. This was not going according to the script at all. The 30,000 Baiming army were also confused. They were supposed to be the ones attacking, but now, they were the ones being attacked. Since they were completely unprepared, and the 30,000 infantrymen that came were all infantrymen, Tong Long destroyed their first line of defense in just one exchange. If it wasn't for the fact that the 30,000 men were so crowded that they couldn't retreat even if they wanted to, they might have been directly scattered. On the city gate tower, Bai Shuang saw everything. When he saw that the 30,000 Baiming infantrymen were actually so weak, his eyes couldn't help but light up. Originally, he thought that since the enemy had so many people, he should focus on defense. He never thought that an opportunity would appear in front of him. How could he be polite? He immediately led his men down the city gate tower, and then led the 2,005-star army cavalry that were already prepared for battle and charged out of the city. Originally, Tong Long was prepared to take advantage of the situation and leave. However, he didn't receive the signal to retreat. Then, he saw Bai Shuang leading his army and charging out. At this moment, if he still didn't know what to do, then he would have led his troops in vain. Brothers, continue to attack. Commander Bai is here to support us. Tong Long shouted as he continued to urge his horse to attack. He did his best to maintain the momentum of the charge and not give the Baiming army a chance to counterattack and regain their morale. In less than half an incense stick's worth of time, Bai Shuang led his 2,000 men from the 1st Cavalry Division over. If Tong Long and his men's attack was like a light rain and a level 4 wind, then their appearance was like a rainstorm and a level 7 wind. They unsheathed their swords and slashed out more than 10 times in a short period of time. Especially with the help of the array formation at the tip of the arrows, they quickly pierced through the defense of the northern Ming army. When the second layer of the human wall was also broken down, and before the third layer of the human wall was completely built, they began to kill. Even though Yang Qindong had said before that if possible, they should try not to kill the Han soldiers. However, this was a matter of life and death, and they couldn't care less. In this battle of life and death, the 2,000 cavalry of the No. 1 Cavalry Division fully displayed their bravery, and what it meant to be unstoppable. Under the storm-like attacks, the formation attacks were like arrows piercing through the air. One by one, the Baiming army soldiers were cut down to the ground, and the soldiers who wanted to establish a defensive line were sent flying by the charge of their warhorses. As their morale continued to soar, the advantage of the 5,000 cavalry became greater and greater, and the morale of the Baiming army began to waver. No one knew who was the first to turn and flee, but it caused a chain reaction that caused the entire army to collapse. The 30,000 Baiming army did not even have a chance to stand firm before they were defeated. Riding on his warhorse, Chandula still had a look of lingering fear on his face. Seeing that the situation was over, he knew that there was no way to turn the situation around. He could only hatefully turn and leave. Since their general had left, how could the soldiers under him continue to risk their lives? It was really death, escape, death, and injury. The 30,000 soldiers left behind a ground full of corpses and captives, and in the end, only 10,000 managed to escape. With 4,500 cavalry, not only had they defeated the 30,000 Baiming army, they had also killed 5,000 and captured 15,000. This kind of accomplishment caused the surrendered Baiming army soldiers to be dumbfounded. In the past, they had been talking about how powerful the 5-star army was. This time, they had really opened their eyes. The capture of captives and the cleaning of the battlefield continued until nighttime. Even so, it was still not completely cleaned up. Considering that there was no one in Jianghu's Wuwei city who belonged to him, Bai Shuang still brought his men back to the city. Seeing their return, everyone looked at them with respect. When Bai Shuang saw Tong Sheng at the city gate leading the people to welcome him, he first laughed and then said, "Everyone has worked hard in this battle. In a while, we will reward you according to your contributions. Don't worry, even the soldiers who defended the city will be rewarded. By the way, the battlefield outside the city has not been cleaned up yet. If there are any people who want to help, you can go now. Don't worry, you only need to hand over 80% of the things you picked up. The remaining 20% is yours." What? Is this true? The people who were originally lining the streets to welcome them were shocked when they heard this. They were not here to support the 5-star army. Although they had won the battle and protected Jianghu's Wuwei city, in the eyes of most people, even if Chandula took back this place, they would not be too surprised or flustered. After all, they were just ordinary people. To them, it did not matter who the emperor was. The reason why they came here was because Tong Xing promised to share the meat soup that the soldiers drank. This was the real benefit. But now, they suddenly heard that they could also get benefits. Moreover, they could get 20% of whatever they took. This was something that they had never thought of before. That's right. Our 5-star army will definitely keep our word. I just want to remind everyone that the things you took must be handed over to the government. Once someone is found to have embezzled, it will be a crime. Then, there will be a big problem. Other people can also supervise each other. If you find out, you can report it. As the informant, you can get 50% of the things as a reward. Bai Shuang used the set of rules that he saw when he was with Yang Qindong. Back then, when he asked the people to clean up the battlefield, he used this method. Although it could not completely eliminate embezzlement, more than 90% of the things could be retrieved. Of course, we will do such a good thing. Don't worry, with us here, we will definitely not let anyone take things home. That's right, such a good thing cannot be ruined because of one or two people. We have to be conscious and supervise each other. These words quickly attracted the support of the people. After that, there was no welcoming ceremony. Even though the sky was already dark, there were still many commoners who left the city with torches and ran towards the battlefield outside the city. There was a lot of wealth waiting for them there. If they could pick up some iron weapons, they would definitely be able to sell them to the 5-star army for a good price. When most of the people had left, Tong Xing came to Bai Shuang with a worried face. Commander Bai, are we really going to let the people help? Once they have money, will they listen to our orders? Just like just now, if it wasn't for the meat soup, I'm afraid that they wouldn't have come out to welcome the victorious army. Tong Xing's thinking had become a common problem among the people in power. They didn't want the people to be so poor that they couldn't even afford to eat, but they also didn't want them to be so rich that they wouldn't listen to their orders. But they didn't know that if a country really wanted to be rich and powerful, they had to learn how to hide their wealth from the people. As long as the people had money in their hands, they would protect their rights and interests from being violated. When faced with an invading enemy, they would do their best to protect them. It wouldn't be like now where no one cared about the outcome of the war. Chapter 1152. These words were said by Yang Qindong, so Bai Shuang naturally believed them without a doubt. Now that he saw Tong Xing so anxious, he comforted him and said, "Don't worry, everything is under control. By the way, Elder Tong, thank you for helping to defend the city this time. I will definitely report your contribution. I'm sure Bugnam of Gojoseon won't mistreat you." Speaking of his own matters, Tong Xing was a little reserved. He smiled and said, well said, well said. Not to mention what happened in Jianzhou's left guard city, Chandula had only run a few dozen miles when he met General Li Tong, who came to his rescue. He brought a total of 170,000 Baiming army with him. Originally, he thought that if everything went smoothly, he could directly take over the Jianzhou left guard. However, when he saw Chandula's sorry state and the number of troops that were obviously less than when he sent out his troops, he frowned. "General Chen, it seems that everything is not going well. Sigh, the other party didn't play by the rules. My troops were defeated." Chandula seemed to have aged a lot in an instant. After all, many of the cavalry that chased after him were originally soldiers of the Jianzhou left guard, which meant that they were his troops. He had been the commander of the Jianzhou left guard for many years and thought that he was in control of everything. However, now that he was defeated by his own troops, one could imagine how depressed and disappointed he was. What exactly happened? Li Tong said with an unfriendly expression. This was an army of 30,000, and now only 1/3 of them had returned. The difference was too great. Although it was a little embarrassing, it had already happened and there was no way to hide it. Therefore, Chandula explained everything in detail. In the end, he said, the cavalry of the 5-star army is indeed powerful. Although we have the advantage in numbers, without preparation, we can't use our advantage in numbers at all. This time, I was careless and thought that the other party wouldn't dare to make a move. Generally, I beg for your forgiveness. Li Tong's expression was very ugly. He wanted to say that he was indeed guilty. He had lost 20,000 troops in an instant and even deserved death. However, Li Tong didn't dare to punish him for his crimes. Putting aside the fact that Chandula was a third-rank military official in the imperial court, just like him, he didn't have the authority to set up a court. Furthermore, this was the Liaodong region, and Chandula had been operating here for many years. It was impossible to say that he didn't have any connections. If he dared to kill such a person, he would definitely receive the full force of the other guards. If that was the case, it would be strange if he felt good about it. Even if he could not incriminate Chindula, Li Tong would not let Chindula have a good time. After thinking for a while, he said, "General Qin, no matter what, we have lost 20,000 soldiers and horses this time. Moreover, all of our provisions have been taken away. The provisions of our army will not last for more than a few days. Do you think this was an opportunity for Chindo to perform meritorious deeds, and also to negotiate conditions? If you don't want to be punished, you have to do something." How could Chindula not understand? He immediately patted his chest and promised, "General Li, don't worry. I am very familiar with this area. Whoever has money and provisions is in my heart. How about this, I will go find them now and collect taxes again. Then I will have to trouble you, General Qin." Li Tong was waiting for this sentence. Only at this moment did his expression become better. The two of them immediately divided the work. They decided that tomorrow morning, Li Tong would lead his troops out of the Jian province left guard and try to take over the place. Chindula would go to the nearby area to collect provisions. No matter what, they couldn't let the army starve. Not to mention the process of collecting provisions and the resentment of the people by Chindula's 10,000 soldiers, Li Tong and his army of 170,000 arrived at Jian province left guard city the next morning. From afar, banners were fluttering in the wind, and soldiers were standing guard. It looked like they were ready for battle. Looks like the other side has a lot of soldiers. How about this, arrange someone to call the city. Oh right, before you go, you must prepare the defense, especially the horse-repelling stakes. You must arrange more of them. With the previous example of Chindula's army being defeated, Li Tong didn't dare to be careless. That's right, Jian province left guard seemed to have a lot of soldiers standing guard. What Li Tong didn't know was that most of them were his comrades in the Baiming army yesterday. It turned out that Bai Shuang was still worried about the lack of soldiers. In yesterday's battle, he directly took 15,000 captives. He used the method of giving them money to win them over. This time, he didn't give them much money, only 2 taels per captive. In his words, they would be heavily rewarded after they achieved military merits. The Baiming captives firmly believed this point. Because just last night, they saw with their own eyes that the 3,000 captive soldiers of the Jianzhou left guard left behind in the city, although they didn't leave the city to fight, because of their contribution to the defense of the city, each of them was rewarded with 1 tael of silver. They didn't do anything, but they received money. Such a good thing really happened in front of them. Just based on this, everyone believed in Bai Shuang's words. With the addition of these 15,000 captives, Bai Shuang was full of confidence. He was no longer thinking about how to defend the city, but how to cooperate with the 1st Cavalry Division's main force to destroy the Baiming army. The persuasion to surrender began. A Baiming emissary who was eloquent came to the city and shouted loudly. It was nothing more than that if they surrendered now, they could live. Otherwise, once the city was captured, everyone who helped the 5-star army would be punished and so on. These words could be said to be useless. On the contrary, under this threat, it only made the captives rely on the 5-star army even more. Bai Shuang watched from the city gate tower without any intention of stopping. This gave the Baiming emissary even more confidence. He thought that Bai Shuang was really afraid. As a result, his threats became even more intense. When the soldiers on the city gate were about to get anxious, Bai Shuang saw that the time was right and ordered to shoot arrows. This scared away the Baiming emissary who came to persuade them to surrender. Since the persuasion failed, Li Tong had no choice but to start a siege. In order to show his military strength as much as possible, he prepared 4 echelons, each with 5,000 men. They would attack the city in turns. He wanted to let the 5-star army know how powerful he was and not give them any time to rest. In the end, he would win by exhausting them. Since ancient times, the side that attacked the city would always be at a disadvantage. After all, they had to charge into a dangerous area that was hundreds of meters away. They also had to brave the dangers of arrows, crossbows, and kerosene to reach the city gate tower. With this advantage, Bai Shuang only arranged for 3,000 men to defend the city gate tower at once. He could already see that the other side wanted to fight a war of attrition. Since that was the case, he would play with them. The battle began in the afternoon. Using the ladders that had been prepared beforehand, the northern Ming army launched a frenzied attack on the city. Below the city walls were densely packed soldiers who were charging forward. They shouted loudly and continuously charged forward with swords in their left hand and shields in their right hand. Under the leadership of Bai Shuang, the 5-star army on the city gate tower counterattacked in an orderly manner. From afar, they used bows and arrows. From close range, they used boulders, crossbows, and kerosene. They fully displayed their advantage of being in a high position and repelled the enemy wave after wave. From afternoon to night, 2 groups of 5,000 men were defeated. Facing this result, Li Tong's expression didn't change. This was already within his expectations. However, no matter how much he had to pay, he didn't have any intention of stopping. Strictly speaking, this was his first battle since he came here. He couldn't afford to lose. Under Li Tong's command, even if the sky was completely dark, the attack didn't stop. Everyone used torches to light up the surroundings and continued to attack the city. The battle continued. This battle went on for 3 days and 3 nights without stopping. After 3 consecutive days of attacking the city, there were no victories. Bai Shuang, who was defending the city, lost more than 6,000 Baiming captives in 3 days and 3 nights. Among them, 4,000 were injured and couldn't participate in any battles for a while. On the side attacking the city, Li Tong's army suffered heavier losses. More than 30,000 men were killed or injured. Most of the soldiers were exhausted and their provisions were about to run out. On the 4th day, Chandula appeared with a large amount of provisions. These were all gathered from the nearby 30,000 guards and the Songhua River. Considering that he had already collected them once, he naturally encountered a lot of resistance when he collected them this time. In the end, he went from collecting to robbing. With the advantage of 10,000 soldiers, he really managed to get a lot. This could be considered to have completely solved the problem of provisions in the army. Looking at the piles of provisions and the stolen silver, which were like a small mountain, Li Tong finally breathed a sigh of relief. He looked at Chandula, whose eyes were bloodshot, and said, "General Chen, you've worked hard." Chandula smiled bitterly and said, "It doesn't matter if it's a little hard. However, this second collection will cause a lot of damage to the people nearby. I hope this battle will end soon and give them a chance to recuperate." "It definitely will," Li Tong said confidently. Then, he ordered everyone to cook and prepare a full meal for everyone. Then, they would work hard and strive to take down the Jian province left guard tomorrow. On the tower of the Jian province left guard, the siege was still ongoing. From time to time, screams could be heard. Every scream represented the loss of a soldier's life. This made Bai Shuang, who was below the tower, squint his eyes. Of the 18,000 captives, only a fraction was left. From the looks of it, the price they would have to pay tonight would not be small. If that was the case, how many more days would the city be able to hold out was something that no one could be sure of. This time, Bai Shuang had miscalculated. He had overestimated the combat power of the Baiming captives. He thought that with the high walls of the city, there would be no problem at all to defend the city. However, when the battle really started, it was a completely different matter. The military quality was not good, and they did not know how to cooperate. Some of the soldiers were even very timid. When they saw the densely packed siege army below the city, their legs went soft before the battle. All these changes caused him to suffer such a great loss. If the strength of the Baiming army was not average, it would be hard to say if they could achieve a 3-to-1 ratio. Chapter 1153. After 3 days and 3 nights, they had lost more than half of their forces. If this continued, they would probably lose the city in another 3 days and 3 nights. "Commander, why don't we kill our way out?" With the advantage of our cavalry, we should be able to catch them off guard and reduce the pressure on the city. Ever since Tong Long had been promoted to battalion commander, his heart was filled with the desire to perform meritorious deeds. He had noticed that Bai Shuang's black cloak, which represented his status as a regiment commander, was very eye-catching. If he wanted to gain merit, he could only perform well on the battlefield. Fighting outside the city was undoubtedly the best opportunity. How could Bai Shuang not know that a cavalry attack could turn the tide of the battle? However, he did not think that the Baiming army, who had suffered a loss once, would be unprepared. Although he could not see anything from the tower, he had a feeling, or perhaps his sixth sense, that the Baiming army was waiting for their cavalry to leave the city. Battalion Commander Tong, there is no need to rush. Before we know the enemy's background, any action outside the city is a risk. Unless it is absolutely necessary, we will not take the risk. Considering that there was no evidence, Bai Shuang did not say it clearly. However, when Tong Long heard these words, his face was filled with displeasure. Commander Bai, you can't be afraid, right? If that is the case, then hand over my 2,500 cavalry and I will go out to fight. Impudent. Bai Shuang suddenly let out a cold snort, and the aura of his entire body was released, shocking Tong Long on the spot. All along, Bai Shuang had given him the impression that he was very refined, even when he was killing enemies on the battlefield. Perhaps this had something to do with the fact that he had learned from Yang Qindong, but this did not mean that he did not have a temper. When people were chatting in private, they could talk about anything. However, when it came to a battle, when it involved the lives of tens of thousands of people, he could not be careless. Otherwise, not only would he die, he would also let down his teacher, who had valued and nurtured him. There can only be one military order in the army. Tong Long, are you going to disobey a military order? Bai Shuang's aura surged as he asked in a thunderous voice. Tong Long himself was indeed somewhat undisciplined. Otherwise, he wouldn't have led 3,000 cavalrymen out of the city despite Chandula's disapproval. In the past, he had not taken Chandula seriously because the Tong family was powerful enough in the Jianghu left guard. But now, when he faced Bai Shuang, especially when he shouted at him, he unconsciously became a little timid. When he saw that the other party was angry and reprimanded him with military discipline, he quickly cupped his fists and said, "Your subordinate doesn't dare. It's best if you don't dare. I can also tell you clearly that no means no. If you dare to act without permission, even if you come back victorious, you will be punished by military law. The lightest punishment will be 50 beatings, and the heaviest punishment will be beheading. You decide for yourself." Bai Shuang left this sentence and walked towards his small courtyard. There was still a big battle tomorrow, so he had to seize every moment to rest. Tong Long, who was left behind, had an ugly expression on his face. If he sent out troops without permission, he would be punished even if he won. This made his thoughts of doing something wrong disappear instantly. Now that he had betrayed Baiming, if he offended the 5-star army, there would be no place for him in the world. Suppressing the thought of sending out troops alone, Tong Long shook his head and left. In his heart, he was only thinking that if the city was really in danger, Bai Shuang would probably accept his suggestion. Bai Shuang did the right thing this time. This was because Li Tong had already prepared an army of 10,000 men under the Jianghu left guard city. They carried bows and arrows on their backs and formed a semicircle, waiting for the 5-star army's cavalrymen to appear. Then, they would surge forward and deal a heavy blow. Considering that Chandula's army had been defeated, Li Tong made an extra move. It was a pity that it hadn't been used yet. It didn't matter. Although it hadn't been used, Li Tong wasn't discouraged. In his opinion, since the provisions had been supplied, he only needed to continue attacking the city. With the advantage of military strength, there wouldn't be any place that he couldn't conquer. He had even thought about it. He would launch an even fiercer attack tomorrow morning. He was determined to take down the Jianghu left guard city. This battle would also become a stepping stone for him to come to the Liaodong region. With this battle, he would definitely gain great merit and be valued by the emperor. However, What Li Tong didn't know was that there was a group of black figures gathering on a hill 50 kilometers north of them. If someone happened to see this scene and was able to clearly see who was coming, they would definitely be very surprised. This was because they were the main force of the world-famous 1st Cavalry Division. The people gathered here were the main force of the 1st Cavalry Division, led by Jianghu. It had been more than 3 days since Bai Shuang sent people out to deliver the letter. Relying on their speed, they quickly arrived here. Now, even the closest 5th Regiment had gathered. 8,000 of the most heroic cavalry had appeared. They would form an unstoppable torrent as they rushed towards the target. The soldiers below had temporarily built a house with wood and leaves. Tian, who was staying here. At this moment, he was waiting for Yang Chendong's return telegram. The reconnaissance cavalry sent out earlier had already reported the battle situation of the Jianghu left guards. After learning that Commander Bai Shuang had been guarding the city for nearly 4 days, Tian decided to attack immediately. After all, the battlefield was unpredictable, and one mistake could lead to an outcome that no one could predict. Once the Jianghu left guard city was really taken down, the role of the cavalry would be greatly reduced. This was not what Tian wanted to see. The telegram had been sent out. After all, this war involved more than 200,000 people. Even Tian couldn't act on his own. He had to report it to his superior and get permission. Hasn't the telegram been sent back yet? Half an hour had passed, but there was still no news. Tian who had always been calm, became a little anxious and began to ask for the first time. No. The telegraphist of the 1st Cavalry Division shook his head and continued to stare at the radio station. He didn't dare to miss the slightest movement. Tian frowned slightly. He knew about Yang Chendong's situation. There were 3 radio stations around him, and one of them was a motor that could be manually generated. With these, it was impossible for the radio station to run out of power. Then why didn't he call back after receiving the telegram? According to the rules, the army couldn't act rashly without a reply. But if there was no reply, would they have to wait forever? It was not an exaggeration to say that the Jianghu left guard city was racing against time. One more day meant one more day of danger. Someone, send another telegram to ask. Tian who was a little anxious, continued to send an order to the telegraphist. What Tian didn't know was that 30 kilometers northeast of them, there was a group of cavalrymen rushing towards them at high speed. From afar, they were all dressed in black clothes, black armor, and black cloaks. Streaks of murderous aura constantly collided with the surrounding air. Only one cavalry unit in the world could carry such a murderous aura and be so well equipped. It was Yang Chendong's black cavalry. Just behind these cavalry units, a torrent of bicycles followed. Their speed was not much slower than that of the war horses, and they always maintained a certain distance from the cavalry. If one looked carefully, one would see that these bicyclists were all carrying long objects wrapped in black cloth behind them. What else could they be if they weren't spears? The team was constantly moving forward. Among them, a white horse under a golden cloak was particularly eye-catching. At this moment, beside the white horse, there was also a strong man riding a war horse who was saying something. Young master, Commander Tian just sent another telegram, asking for a battle. Do you want to reply? This Tian is good at everything, but recently, his murderous aura has been too strong. He needs to calm down. This time, just treat it as a training. Don't worry about it, let's continue on our way. Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon, laughed, then shook his head gently. Obviously, he intended to polish Tian's temper. After all, he would be entrusted with greater responsibilities in the future. It would be bad if he couldn't keep calm when something happened. After talking about Tian Yang Chendong looked at the dark scene around him and asked in a deep voice, Beta Persei, how far are we from Tian's division? Young master, it's less than 30 miles away. We can arrive in half an hour. Beta Persei replied confidently. Being able to stay by Yang Chendong's side was indeed very impressive, but in reality, the burden was also very heavy. Whether there was something or not, they had to understand it. Very good. Inform the team that there's no need to rush. Try to preserve the team's physical strength as much as possible. This time, we'll test the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division. Yang Chendong smiled. The reason why he didn't reply to the telegram was because he wanted to test them. It was said that the 1st Cavalry Division was very powerful. This time, Yang Chendong wanted to test it himself. The test stone was his own 1,000 Black Knights and the 4th Army Division. The 1,000 Black Knights had just been replenished. Needless to say, those who could join were naturally the strongest. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were the cream of the crop. Who knew how many people their loyalty was? Fortunately, the chief of security, Yang Chendong, had been doing this work. There were many candidates to be tested, so they could finish replenishing the Black Knights in such a short time. They took a boat from Crimson City all the way to Yang Chendong's side. However, such people also had a special characteristic. Perhaps they were indeed capable, but they always had a sense of arrogance. Yang Chendong wanted to use this opportunity to test their strength. At the same time, he wanted to warn them that although the Black Knights were strong, if they didn't work hard, they could be overtaken by others. The 4th Army Division was needless to say. Firearms had a natural advantage over cold weapons. In order to suppress the momentum of the 1st Cavalry Division, Yang Chendong specially allowed the 4th Army Division to participate and asked them to use empty shells. Chapter 1154. Commander Ling Daqiang naturally agreed with this order. Cold Front's reputation had been overshadowed countless times by the world's #1 Cavalry Division. Now that there was such an open and above-board opportunity to take revenge, he naturally wouldn't miss it. In order to achieve the goal of completing the mission, he ordered all the soldiers of the Cold Vanguard to be in their best condition. If anyone dropped the ball, they would be kicked out of the Cold Vanguard. This was no longer just a matter between the 4th Infantry Division and the world's 1st Cavalry Division. It concerned the reputation of the entire Cold Vanguard. Under Yang Chendong's orders, close to 10,000 soldiers quietly arrived. The scouts sent by the 4th Division and the Black Knights were the best scouts. Very quickly, the scouts sent by Tian were eliminated one by one. With the advanced firearms and the speed of the Black Knights, the 1st Cavalry Division was at a disadvantage, at least on the outskirts. Tian was naturally unaware of all this. At this moment, he was still waiting for Yang Chendong's reply. It was almost midnight. Soon, the sun would rise, but there was still no news. Tian was burning with anxiety. Waiting felt like forever. Tian had already drunk at least 5 cups of tea, but there was still no news from the telegraph operator. Just as he was feeling uneasy, the 3rd Regiment commander, Bo arrived outside the tent and said loudly, "Division Commander, Bo wishes to see you. Come in." Tian straightened his body and tried his best to hide his anxiety. Then, he took out the style of a division leader. Bo entered the tent and saw that there was only Tian and the telegraph operator. She immediately understood and asked with concern, "Division Commander, is there still no news from Bugnam of Gojoseon?" No. There was nothing to hide, so Tian admitted it. He then looked at Bo and asked with a smile, "What? Did the 3rd Regiment commander come just to ask about this?" "Of course not. Master, I'm here to report to you that there seems to be something wrong with tonight's situation." Hesitantly, Bo spoke of her feelings. As a general under the king of the grassland, Bo did indeed have some ability. Perhaps he was born to fight, but whenever he encountered danger, he would always feel uneasy. This feeling had been proven through countless battles, and it just so happened that tonight, this feeling appeared again. Trusting her sixth sense, Bao was no longer sleepy. She got out of her tent and found Lu Duo, the commander of the 2nd Regiment, who was in charge of guarding the perimeter. She asked him to ask the scouts if there was anything strange. After completing this task, Bao couldn't sleep until she got the results. Seeing that Tianhu still had some candlelight, she hurried over. Wrong? What's wrong? Tianhu didn't react until he saw the solemn expression on Hu Bei's face. He suddenly stood up and said, "What's wrong? Are you saying that someone will try to harm us tonight?" "This. I don't know." Hu Bei shook her head. She didn't dare to make a decision on such an important matter. Instead, she hesitated for a moment before saying, "I think we should wait for news from Commander Lu." Tianhu was usually a careful person. Otherwise, the 1st Cavalry Division wouldn't have achieved such great results under his leadership. However, he couldn't believe that someone would dare to target him. Was it that General Li Tong from Baiming? He should still be attacking the Jianghu left guard right now. How could he have the time to cause trouble for him? Just as he was in disbelief, footsteps came from outside the door. Then, Lu Duo said, "2nd Regiment Commander Lu Duo wants to see Master." "Come in." Tianhu knew that Lu Duo must have brought some news. Moreover, from Lu Duo's somewhat anxious footsteps, Tianhu faintly felt that something was wrong. Lu Duo quickly appeared in front of Tianhu. As expected, his complexion was not good. He first nodded to the 3rd captain, Hu Bei, who had reported to him. Then, he looked at Tianhu and said, "Division Master, I just sent someone to contact our scouts. There are more than 10 of them who have yet to contact us." "Which direction?" Tianhu knew that for the safety of the army, they had to send out close to 100 cavalrymen every night. Now that there were more than 10 cavalrymen who couldn't be contacted, it was very likely that there was a problem in one direction. "Northeast," Lu Duo said in a doubtful tone. It was no wonder that he had such an attitude. The Northeast was already under the control of the 5-star army. There shouldn't be any problems there. Even Tianhu was confused. Northeast? How is that possible? As he spoke, he walked over to the map. "Yes, that's the territory of the 5-star army. There shouldn't be any problems there. But it is true that we have lost contact with the scouts there." Lu Duo was the person on duty tonight. He couldn't understand. "Since we have lost contact, we have to be more vigilant." Hu Bei, who had been the first to report, was still very resolute. "That's right." Tianhu quickly recovered from his shock. He looked at Lu Duo and said, "Regiment Commander Lu, immediately gather the soldiers. Whether or not there really is a problem, we can't take any chances." "Understood." After receiving the order, Lu Duo nodded and agreed. He then turned around and went to carry it out. Even Hu Bei stepped forward. He wanted to prepare his 3rd regiment for battle as well. Not even 15 minutes after the 2 regimental commanders left, gunshots rang out from outside the camp. The attack on the 1st Cavalry Division had begun. When Tianhu heard the gunshots, he walked out of the camp and looked towards the northeast in disbelief. How is that possible? They are really attacking us from behind. They even have a large number of firearms. Who are they? With a look of disbelief and doubt on his face, Tianhu got on his horse and said to Temu, Lu Duo, Hu Bei, and Gong Feng, "No matter who comes, we can't back down. It's nighttime now, the best time for our 1st Cavalry Division to fight at night. I want everyone to launch a counterattack. If there are too many enemies, retreat before daybreak and regroup with the Saha River Guards." Any questions? No. The 4 regimental commanders replied. Very good. Get ready for battle. Tianhu said with a solemn expression. Although tonight's opponent had indeed caught him off guard, he was not afraid. On the contrary, he wanted to see what kind of army dared to have designs on the world's #1 cavalry division. A division commander and 4 regimental commanders were about to issue orders to lead the cavalry to launch a counterattack under the cover of the night. However, before they could do anything, a cavalry warrior had already arrived in front of them. Division Commander, Wu Nan Wang is here. Prepare for, what? Tianhu was stunned. He thought he had heard wrongly. Division Commander, Bugnam of Gojoseon is here. He is personally leading the Black Knights towards us. They are less than 2 miles away. The soldier saw that Tian-Hu was still in a daze and repeated himself. This time, Tian-Hu heard everything clearly. Then, when he thought of the sneak attack, he came up with an idea. However, this was not the time to think about this. After looking at the faces of the 4 regimental commanders, he said, "Let's go. Let's welcome Bugnam of Gojoseon together." Tian-Hu and the others had only walked a few hundred meters when Yang Chendong appeared in front of them with a group of black knights in black clothes, black armor, and black cloaks. Tian-Hu and the others immediately dismounted and knelt down to pay their respects. They shouted, "Greetings to Bugnam of Gojoseon. Sorry to disturb you in the middle of the night. You have worked hard." Bugnam of Gojoseon casually waved his hand and motioned for everyone to get up. The meaning behind this sentence made Tian-Hu raise his head again. "Teacher, were you the one who arranged the sneak attack tonight?" Not bad. You reacted quickly. In fact, your performance was not bad. You were able to gather the troops so quickly. This made the feast that I prepared for you unable to come true." While saying these words, Yang Chendong laughed heartily. Obviously, he was quite satisfied with this result. Yang Chendong was not angry. Tian-Hu's heart was at ease. Then, he thought of something and said, "Teacher, do we have any other problems?" There is a problem." At this moment, Yang Chendong's expression became more serious. As I said before, even cavalry scouts need to have 2 groups, one in the open and one in the dark. When necessary, there needs to be a 3rd group to observe everything in the dark. However, you obviously did not do that this time. You only arranged for one group of cavalry to be in charge of guarding. This is not good. War is not child's play. Even if the northeast is your rear, you still have to act according to military discipline. By the way, who is in charge of guarding tonight? Bugnam of Gojoseon. It's your subordinate. The 2nd Regiment Commander, Lu Duo, walked out with a red face. Regiment Commander Lu, you bear a lot of responsibility for tonight's incident. In order to show military discipline, I will deduct half a year of your salary. Do you have any objections? By the way, you have the same leadership responsibility as your division commander. Half a year of your salary will also be deducted. Yang Chendong said in an unquestionable tone. Although the 1st Cavalry Division had already done a good job, after all, no one would have thought that there would be a problem in their rear. However, whether or not they had thought of it, a loophole was a loophole. Sometimes, a small loophole could put an army in danger. Because of this, Yang Chendong wanted to punish them. Moreover, it would not be too heavy as a warning. Your subordinate accepts the punishment. It was only half a year of salary. The symbolic meaning was more important than the actual meaning. Tian-Hu and Lu Duo admitted their mistakes. Good. Since everyone is awake, then don't sleep anymore. Get ready. We are going to send a gift to the Baiming army. After dealing with the matter in front of him, Yang Chendong's eyes were filled with the aura of an elite. This Li Tong had guts. He actually dared to attack a city that belonged to the 5-star army. If he did not show him how strong the 5-star army was, how could he show the strength of the 5-star army? Chapter 1155. The sky slowly brightened. More and more Baiming soldiers began to gather at the foot of the Jianghu left guard city. Countless scaling ladders were carried into the army. War drums beat and shouts shook the sky. Above the city gate tower, Bai Shuang narrowed his eyes and looked at everything below the city. He could see that the Baiming army's discipline seemed to be much stricter and the morale of the soldiers seemed to have improved a lot. Although he did not know what caused it, he still cautiously said to the soldiers beside him, "Inform everyone that the enemy's attack today will be very fierce. Tell everyone to be in their best condition." Baiming soldiers had eaten their fill last night. Even this morning, there was still shredded meat in the soup. They had never enjoyed such treatment before and were ready to do their best. Chandula did not sleep much last night, so his eyes were still a little red. However, he had to force himself to stay alert. The Jianghu left guard was his territory. If he could not get it back, it would be a great sin. Even if it was for his own life, he had to fight with all his might. Li Tong, who noticed this scene, looked at Chandula's appearance and laughed. "Don't worry. We have so many soldiers. It's only a matter of time before we take down the Jianghu left guard. This will still be your territory." It was no wonder that Li Tong was so happy. Once they took down this place, he would have made a great contribution. Not only would he have taken back the city, but he would also have defeated the 5-star army. When he reported this to the imperial court, he would have made a great contribution. He would also be the first general to defeat the 5-star army on the battlefield. Just thinking about it made him feel good. Yes, General Li is right. We must take down the Jianghu left guard. Chandula said with a hint of ruthlessness in his voice. Both generals made up their minds and the general attack began. In order to achieve the goal of taking down the Jianghu left guard in one battle, they sent out 4 echelons in the first battle, a total of 20,000 soldiers to attack the city. They launched a wave of attacks from the east, south, west, and north. There were only 8,000 soldiers guarding the city, and they were divided into 4 towers. There were only 2,000 soldiers on each tower, and the weakness of the lack of military strength was quickly revealed. After only half an hour of fighting, some Biming soldiers had already rushed up the city walls. Although they were quickly suppressed, the situation was still very dangerous. "Commander, let's switch from cavalry to infantry and reinforce the tower." Tong Long could tell that the situation was not good, so he anxiously suggested to White Shuang. "No, let the cavalry prepare to leave the city for battle." Bai Shuang shook his head. He knew very well that the 2,000 men he brought with him and the 2,500 men under Tong Long's command were all cavalrymen. Asking them to dismount and fight was tantamount to giving up their greatest advantage. It was not worth it. Furthermore, he didn't think that these 4,500 people would be able to turn the tide of the battle. They would only be able to hold on for a little longer. Looking into the distance, Bai Shuang's expression remained calm. However, in his heart, he said anxiously, "Master, why aren't you here yet?" Could it be that the Jianghu left guard was going to give up just like that? The siege was still ongoing. As if he could see that victory was already decided, Li Tong sent out another 20,000 soldiers, divided into 4 echelons, and continued to increase the number of soldiers, causing the Jianghu left guard's defense to become shaky. When Chandula saw that the city was about to fall, the trace of worry in his heart finally disappeared. He laughed and said, "General Li is amazing. If this continues, the city will definitely fall today. When the 5-star army's reinforcements arrive, we can only leave regretfully." Ha ha ha. I hope that the 5-star army's reinforcements will arrive. I have arranged a feast for 30,000 soldiers at the back of the army. Li Tong arrogantly snorted and then laughed. "I'm just afraid that some people won't dare to come. Otherwise, I'll let them see how powerful we are. General Li is wise." Chandula said flatteringly. There were indeed 30,000 Biming soldiers at the back of the army. They had a large number of horse barricades, but because they were well hidden, they couldn't be seen from afar. Among them, there were also many archers and spearmen. They were specifically used to deal with the 5-star army's cavalry. As soon as they appeared, they would use bows and arrows to attack from afar. When they got closer, the spearmen would attack. After inflicting heavy damage, they would carry out a large number of horse barricades. At that time, the 5-star army's cavalry would be unable to return. This set of tactics was indeed suitable to deal with cavalry. If they weren't prepared, even if the 1st Cavalry Division arrived, they wouldn't be able to gain any advantage. They might even be heavily injured. However, Li Tong neglected one point. He forgot about Yang Chendong. Against this kind of formation, the cavalry would naturally suffer heavy losses. However, if it was changed to a flintlock attack, it would be completely different. In front of the cold front that could shoot further and aim more accurately, the archers and spearmen were just sending themselves to their deaths. Originally, they had already spread out a large net and were just waiting for the 5-star Army's cavalry to appear. However, because of Yang Chendong's appearance and the 4th Lu Division's attack, the situation had changed greatly. The victory had been turned into a defeat. Of course, Li Tong didn't know all of this. If he knew that Bugnam of Gojoseon and the 4th Lu Division would appear here, he wouldn't be so confident. He would have retreated to a nearby city to hide. Many times, war was also about information. The side with more accurate information would have the upper hand and be able to obtain the final victory. Yang Chendong brought the army over. In order to conserve the soldiers' stamina, they didn't rush over very quickly. When they saw the 30,000 Baiming army blocking their path, 4 hours had already passed since Li Tong gave the order to attack the city. Teacher, it seems like the Jianzhou left guard is in danger. I don't know if Commander Bai Shuang can hold them off. Why don't I lead the cavalry to charge first? Sensing the intensity of the battle ahead, Division Commander Tianhu volunteered. Don't be in a hurry. You have to believe in Bai Shuang. He isn't someone who will just sit there and wait for death. Since there aren't any cavalry charging out of the city gates, it shouldn't be the end yet. What we need to do now is to deal a heavy blow to the Baiming army in front of us. Only then will we be able to completely turn the situation around. Yang Chendong's eyes were as sharp as a hawk's. He could immediately tell that the 30,000 Baiming army in front of them were here to block their path. Tian, who naturally didn't dare to question Yang Chendong's orders. He looked at the 30,000 Baiming army in front of him and said with pride. It's only 30,000 Baiming infantry. Although there are a lot of them, they are nothing in front of the 1st Cavalry Division. Teacher, please wait a moment. Let's see how I break through them. As he spoke, Tian, who was about to order the brothers of the 1st Cavalry Division to attack. After all, winning a battle with a small number of people was a common occurrence in their eyes. No. Yang Chendong grabbed Tianhu, who was about to leave, and said with bright eyes, "Can't you see that the enemy is full of archers and spearmen? They are all used against cavalry. Also, they are standing so close together. It's obvious that they are hiding something. They might even have something that is used against cavalry. It's not wise to rush out now." After Yang Chendong's analysis, Tianhu didn't act rashly. It wasn't that he hadn't encountered a formation that was used against cavalry before. However, with the bravery of the soldiers and the tip of the arrows, there was nothing that couldn't be broken through. As for the archers' attacks, they were nothing in front of the 1st Cavalry Division, who had a blade and a shield. It was the same for the spearmen. As long as they charged forward fiercely enough, they could completely crush their opponents. Then, it would be time for the autumn wind to sweep away the fallen leaves. However, if the enemy was still hiding some trump cards, then it would be bad. After all, the 1st Cavalry Division's biggest weakness was that they were too few in number. They only had 8,000 men now. Even if they lost 3-1, they couldn't afford to lose so many men. Teacher, there's no hurry. Let the 4th Master Lu take action. They have been holding back for a long time. Moreover, the formation in front of them doesn't have the slightest bit of obstruction. Yang Chendong saw Tianhu's hesitation and chuckled. Then, he turned to the 4th Master Lu's Ling Daqiang and said, "Master Ling, is there any problem with leaving the first battle to you?" Other than the 4th Master Lu, the rest were all cavalry. Ling Daqiang originally thought that he wouldn't have anything to do in this battle and was prepared to capture captives. But now that the first battle was going to be handed over to him, how could he possibly decline? Thus, he immediately agreed with a face full of joy. "6th young master, just wait and see. An opponent like this who doesn't even have the slightest bit of resistance is exactly like a meal on a plate for us 4th Master Lu, ha ha ha." The spearmen were afraid that the enemy would hide. If there were any obstructions, then it would be depressing. But now, the enemy was on the open ground. They were no different from live targets. As for the archers and spearmen, how could any of them reach them? Good, then quickly go and prepare. Yang Chendong was also worried that Bai Shuang wouldn't be able to defend the city and would rush out first. If that was the case, then once the Baiming army entered the Jian province left guard, it would take a lot more time and effort to capture him. This wasn't something that he wanted to see. After Ling Daqiang agreed, he went to prepare. The fourth Master Lu was originally part of the Cold Vanguard formation. It was an absolute elite force. After the order was given, the 4 regiments under it spread out and began to charge towards the 30,000 Baiming army blocking the way. The 30,000 Baiming army was currently gathered together out of boredom. The mission that Li Tong gave them was to stop any cavalry from the 5-star army that wanted to reinforce the Jian province left guard. However, seeing that their attacks were getting fiercer and fiercer, and that the city was about to be taken, there was still no sign of any reinforcements. Many of them began to slack off, thinking that no more enemies would appear. Chapter 1156. When the 4th Lu Division suddenly appeared in the distance and turned from a small black dot to a large black dot, it also attracted the attention of the soldiers. Some of the Kiliarchs and Centurions also shouted loudly, ordering their soldiers to prepare for battle. That's not right, they aren't cavalry. Some of the sharp-eyed soldiers saw that the enemy wasn't cavalry as General Li Tong expected. That's right, they aren't cavalry. What's going on? As the distance between the two sides decreased, more and more soldiers voiced out their doubts. Who cares what kind of soldiers they are? If cavalry can't charge over, infantry won't be able to either. Everyone, prepare yourselves. Especially the archers, wait for orders to fire. Although the Baiming general in charge of leading the troops was also curious, he still pretended to be calm due to his duty. As he gave his orders, he also arranged for a soldier to report everything that happened to General Li Tong. In order to reach the goal of quickly engaging the enemy, the soldiers of the 4th Lu Division rode their bicycles and rushed to the battlefield. Only when the distance between the two sides was 3 li did they stop their bicycles and change to running. Then, they rushed towards the Baiming army. They're here. They're so fast. Everyone, prepare for battle. Seeing the speed of the army, the Baiming general in charge of leading the troops had a trace of panic in his eyes. Especially the mounts of the 5-star army, they were something he had never seen or heard of before. People often feared things they didn't know, and this Baiming general was one such person. Among the 30,000 soldiers, 10,000 of them were Baiming archers. They had already received orders to draw their bows and reload them. Once the enemy got close, they would release their arrows and heavily injure the enemy. 1,000 meters, 800 meters, 600 meters, 400 meters, 300 meters. They stopped. The Northern Ming soldier who was in charge of observing the distance between the two sides cried out in alarm. He couldn't understand why they suddenly stopped charging. Just as he cried out in alarm, the commander of the 4th Army Division, Ling Daqiang, also gave the order to start shooting. More than 8,095 style guns, which far surpassed that era, spewed out tongues of flame at the same time. One could imagine how magnificent this scene was. With no one able to attack them, the 4th Division was like an aircraft carrier on land, constantly firing bullets as they slowly moved forward. As they continued to advance, one by one, the Baiming soldiers were hit by bullets and fell to the ground. They were like wheat being harvested, unable to struggle at all. This scene caused the 10,000 Northern Ming archers to be dumbfounded. Seeing their comrades fall to the ground one after another, and the arrows they shot were simply not enough to cover the distance. In other words, at this moment, they could only passively take a beating without the slightest ability to retaliate. The originally high morale of the soldiers quickly plummeted. No one knew who was the first to be afraid, as he threw down the bow in his hand and turned to flee. This action caused even more archers to abandon their bows and flee. When the situation began to spread, no matter how much the Baiming general shouted, it was no longer of any use. Hold on, hold on. Where are the pikemen? If there are any deserters, kill them without mercy. Seeing that the battle formation was about to be destroyed, and it was caused by deserters, the Biming general's face burned with anger. After the pikemen received the order, although they were unwilling and did not want to attack their comrades, they could not disobey a military order. They had no choice but to stab forward with the pikes in their hands. In just a few flashes of pikes, more than 1,000 Biming army archers fell, and they finally managed to stop their retreat. Where are the sharpshooters? Do you see that Biming general on the horse? Shoot him down. Ling Daqiang was naturally overjoyed when he saw that the enemy's formation was in chaos after a wave of attacks. However, seeing that the situation was about to be stabilized, how could he be willing to give up? He scanned the surroundings with his binoculars and locked onto the Biming general. There was no lack of sharpshooters in the cold vanguard army. They usually had good eyesight and were fed countless bullets. At this moment, when they heard their division commander's order, several sharpshooters searched for the Biming general on the horse. Soon after, they locked onto him and the sound of gunfire rang out. Bullets whizzed out of the barrels and hit the Biming general's body. The Biming general was still shouting something, trying to turn the situation around. However, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. Then, another bullet hit him between the eyebrows. At this moment, he lost consciousness and fell from the horse in front of him. With the sudden death of the general, the Biming army, without a unified command, was in complete chaos. Although there were still a few captains who were desperately shouting something, trying to get the position of commander, in this chaotic situation, their shouts were like small boats in the middle of a stormy sea. They were completely useless. After another round of gunfire, the archers of the 4th Division fell to the ground. The situation that had just stabilized was once again thrown into chaos. However, this time, no one gave the pikemen an order, and no one stopped the archers from retreating. Not only that, even the pikemen turned their spearheads and ran away. The army was defeated like a landslide. As the Biming soldiers turned around and fled, many of them even threw their weapons to the ground in order to increase their speed. The situation on the battlefield began to change. As the Biming army frantically retreated, the countless stakes and bags of iron caltrops that were hidden behind them were completely exposed. Division Commander Jianghu, who was already prepared, used his binoculars to clearly see this scene. He couldn't help but feel that it was a close call. If it wasn't for the 6th young master stopping him, the 1st Cavalry Division would have suffered a great loss. The stakes could affect the speed and offensive power of the cavalry. As for the iron caltrops, it was needless to say. With its 4 sharp points, it was enough to cause heavy damage to the cavalry. How ruthless. Since that's the case, don't blame us for being impolite. Come, all warriors, charge with me. Let's let them know the consequences of facing the wrath of the world's #1 cavalry division. Charge. The 8,000 cavalrymen who couldn't wait any longer roared and charged forward. The earth seemed to tremble as dust filled the air. Their momentum was unstoppable. In the middle of the Biming army, the Biming soldier who was sent to deliver a message saw Li Tong and Chandula. He reported the scene he saw. Not cavalry, but infantry? What's going on? Li Tong asked with a face full of surprise. The situation was far beyond his expectations, making Li Tong feel that he couldn't control the situation. We don't know. We only saw that the infantry were extremely fast. They seem to be riding on something that we don't recognize. That thing can increase a person's speed. The soldier who delivered the message tried his best to describe what he saw with words. Riding on something can increase their speed? Li Tong, who was repeating this sentence, suddenly changed his expression. As expected of a general from the capital of Biming, Li Tong's knowledge was far greater than Chandula's. After hearing this, he quickly remembered something, and that was the bicycle. Although the bicycle wasn't produced in the outside world yet, some legends about it had already spread. Li Tong had heard of it before, but he had never seen it with his own eyes. When he thought of the bicycle, Li Tong naturally thought of Bugnam of Gojoseon. It was said that only Bugnam of Gojoseon could command such an army. Could it be him? As the saying goes, a man's name is like a tree's shadow. Although many people thought that Bugnam of Gojoseon was being rebellious by commanding an army, no one dared to underestimate him. However, no one dared to look down on him. On the contrary, they were quite fearful of him. Li Tong was one such person. If it was really Bugnam of Gojoseon who appeared here, Li Tong would have to think carefully. This was an existence that was regarded as a war god. No one had ever taken advantage of him before. How could he resist such a person? Just as Li Tong was struggling in his heart, he suddenly heard a burst of firecracker-like sounds. This sound startled him, and he immediately thought of the Flintlock army. Li Tong, who had a trace of suspicion, was now certain. His originally confident spirit was hit. He almost instinctively shouted, "Oh no, it's Bugnam of Gojoseon. It seems that we can't take down the Jianghu left guard. Retreat, prepare to retreat. Is Bugnam of Gojoseon here?" Chandula, who was on the side, asked as if he hadn't asked the question yet. Then, he looked at Li Tong and said, "Generally, we have hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Even if he's here, what's there to be afraid of? We can still fight him." "Fight my ass. Didn't you hear those gunshots? On such an open land, what can we use to fight? Let's retreat." Li Tong was still very self-aware. This was not only because of the fear in his heart. More importantly, he didn't expect Yang Chendong to appear here, so he didn't make any preparations. Under such circumstances, it was obviously unfair to fight with him. As long as the army could be saved, there would be no need to worry about not having a chance to fight in the future. However, if the army was lost, there would be no chance for revenge. Li Tong was the commander. Naturally, no one dared to disobey his order to retreat. Although Chandula looked unwilling, he could only nod and agree in the end. Then, the Biming army that was attacking the city began to retreat step by step. The siege situation also changed because of this. The tower that was about to be breached slowly became quiet. What's going on? Tong Long was prepared to fight to the death with the enemy, but the change in front of him made him a little confused. Commander Bai Shuang, who was prepared to fight outside the city, seemed to have thought of something. He then listened carefully and vaguely heard gunshots. He immediately laughed and said, I know, it must be the teacher. Huh, brothers, Bugnam of Gojoseon is here. It's time for us to fight back with all our strength." Chapter 1157. Bai Shuang had studied with Yang Chendong before, so he was quite familiar with the sounds of guns. Adding on the fact that the Biming army suddenly stopped attacking the city, he immediately thought of a certain possibility. When they heard that Bugnam of Gojoseon had arrived, the 2,400 cavalry soldiers all began to cheer loudly. From this, it could be seen just how high of a position Yang Chendong held in these soldiers' hearts was. Even Tong Long, who had never seen Yang Chendong before, became extremely excited. During this period of time, he had only heard about Bugnam of Gojoseon, and he was about to come out of his cocoon. Now that he could finally see his face, how could he not be excited? Let's go, charge out with this commander and meet up with Bugnam of Gojoseon. Bai Shuang raised his two blades high, shouting loudly in excitement. Following the shout, the city gates opened from the inside, and 4,500 cavalry soldiers charged out like a whirlwind. Speaking of which, it was quite a coincidence. When Bai Shuang and the others charged out, it was precisely when the Biming army was retreating. The 20,000 Biming army that was originally arranged to deal with them had also just cleaned up their things and were retreating. Suddenly, intense battle cries sounded from behind them. When they turned around to take a look, their expressions immediately changed greatly. Li Tong, who had already left the large tent and was leading his soldiers to flee, also saw this scene. He sighed. These 5-star army cavalry were too cunning, actually charging out after he withdrew his defenses. Under this type of timing, even if he gave the order to launch a counterattack now, it was clearly too late. Retreat, retreat, retreat towards the 30,000 guards. Li Tong, who knew that the situation was already in his favor, didn't turn around, instead turning around and fleeing. Behind him was the vast and mighty Biming army. In front of them, who would be afraid of death? That was why at this moment, they actually displayed their life's potential, each one running faster than the other. It was to the extent where not long after, the army responsible for transporting the supplies became the last group. General, what do we do? Seeing that there were already no more troops to protect him, the logistics officer in charge of transporting the supplies asked the leading general. Closing his eyes, the general knew that once the provisions were lost, he would be beheaded according to military discipline. But now that he didn't have the ability to protect these provisions, he simply shook his head and said, "Forget it, they were the ones who abandoned us. It's not that we didn't try our best. Tell the brothers, if you want to escape, then run. If you can't escape, then surrender and wait for the 5-star army to come and take over." Ah! If we go like this, General, we will die. Why don't we burn the provisions? That way, we'll be able to account for it. The logistics officer suggested. No. The general immediately shook his head. If we really do that, we will definitely anger the 5-star army. At that time, we won't even have a chance to live. All right, I've made up my mind. If you want to run, then run. If you don't want to run, then stay here with me and wait for the 5-star army to pick us up. Most of the people transporting the provisions were people with average military skills. How could their speed be compared to the speed of war horses? Most of them stayed behind. Only a small number of them ran away with the mentality of a fluke. After a stick of incense's time, Commander Bai Shuang brought the cavalry over. Along the way, who knew how many of the Biming army were killed and how many were captured? When he arrived in front of the transport team and saw that this team of thousands of people was actually waiting for him, he was very curious and came over on his horse. Surrendered General Zhao Xing greets the general. A general wearing a Kiliarka's armor half knelt in front of Bai Shuang. General Zhao, why didn't you all escape? At the very least, you can burn the provisions. That way, even if you escape, you can account for it to your superiors, right? Bai Shuang asked with a trace of suspicion. The situation was so abnormal that he had to be careful in case the other party was pretending to surrender. We can't burn them. Zhao Xing shook his head and said, with these provisions, countless people can eat and many people can survive. If we burn them, then the only ones who will suffer will be the soldiers and civilians who have no food to eat. Zhao Xing can't do something that would incur the wrath of the heavens and people just to avoid a punishment. Oh! Who would have thought that a mere chiliarch in charge of escorting grain would have such knowledge? This was beyond White Shuang's expectations. He carefully sized up Zhao Xing's appearance again and memorized it in his heart. Then, he took out a token from his bosom and said, "This is my position token. Take this back to Jian Province's left guard city. If anyone asks you about the provisions, you can show this token. Do you have any questions?" After taking the token, Zhao Xing nodded solemnly. "General Bai, don't worry. I know what to do." "Good. We still have to chase after the enemy. You can go about your business." After he finished speaking, Bai Shuang spurred his horse and continued to chase after the Biming army. He didn't turn back to look at Zhao Xing, as if nothing had happened. When the group was far away, Tong Long, who was following in the group, asked Bai Shuang with a puzzled expression, "Commander, do you really believe that Zhao Xing won't escape and will deliver the provisions to the city?" "I'll take a gamble. Also, teacher is here. This area will belong to the 5-star army. He won't be able to escape even if he wants to." Bai Shuang chuckled and continued to spur his horse forward. He did have the intention to test Zhao Xing. If this person really delivered the provisions to Jian Province's left guard city, then he would report this matter to Yang Chendong. This person might be a talent. On the other hand, if this person escaped, then he would also report this matter to Yang Qindong. Anyone who dared to deceive the 5-star army should be prepared for revenge. This was just a small interlude. It wouldn't affect the overall situation. Bai Shuang led thousands of cavalry and chased after them. Although they didn't catch up with Li Tong and Chandula, they still caught up with many of the Baiming army that had fallen behind. In the end, they brought back 5,000 captives. In this battle, the Baiming army retreated without a fight. They lost a total of 40,000 men. 7,000 of them died in battle. The rest were all captives. When Bai Shuang brought the 5,000 captives back to the Jian province's left-guard city, Yang Qindong had already entered the city and was listening to reports from all sides. When Bai Shuang and Tong Long appeared in the main hall of the residence, Yang Qindong's loud laughter rang out. Bai Shuang, it has been hard on you this time. You deserve the most credit for being able to destroy the enemy. Teacher Xia, this is what Bai Shuang should do. By the way, teacher, this person is Tong Long. He made a great contribution by defeating the Jian province's left-guard city without shedding a drop of blood. Bai Shuang took this opportunity to recommend Tong Long. This was the first time Tong Long met Yang Qindong. Although he was older, for some reason, when he saw Yang Qindong, he was shocked by the powerful aura emitted by him. He couldn't help but kneel on the ground. This general, Tong Long, greets Bugnam of Gojoseon. May you live 1,000 years. There's no need for that. We can talk casually. Yang Qindong chuckled. Then, he sized up Tong Long. He found that this person was not only handsome, but also extraordinary. He was very happy. After considering that the other party had made a great contribution, he said, Tong Long, this king wants to establish a reinforced cavalry regiment of Liaodong. How about you be the first commander? By the way, this is a cavalry unit of 5,000 people. Do you have the confidence to lead them well? Tong Long had just been promoted to battalion commander. It was only because of the war situation that he was able to lead 2,500 men. Once the situation returned to normal, he could only lead 400 men. Now that the number had suddenly increased by more than 10 times, how could he not be excited and grateful? What are you waiting for? Quickly thank Bugnam of Gojoseon. Seeing that Tong Long was a little dumbfounded, Bai Shuang immediately reminded him. Oh, this subordinate thanks Bugnam of Gojoseon for promoting me. I will definitely be a good commander and create a strong army. I will not disappoint Bugnam of Gojoseon. Good, good. Yang Qindong nodded in satisfaction. Baiming has the Liaodong Iron Cavalry. My 5-star army also has a Liaodong cavalry regiment. When the time comes, we will see who is more powerful. Right now, this unit is still lacking some core strength. Do you have any talents that you can recommend? Yang Qindong asked with a smile. A cavalry unit of 5,000 people was only a regiment. It could be seen how much importance Yang Qindong placed on this unit. If this kind of unit was only given to Tong Long, no one would be at ease. The others had to be personally appointed by Yang Qindong in order to ensure the loyalty of the unit. Everyone was clear about this point. Immediately, everyone suggested some candidates. Soon, there were suitable candidates for the 12 battalion commanders of the Liaodong Iron Cavalry Regiment. Next was the vice commander. Regarding this problem, no one had any good opinions. First, we have to look at the responsibilities of the vice commander. According to the rules of the 5-star army, the vice commander was to assist the commander in managing the entire unit. Only when the commander was not around would the vice commander have the right to make decisions. Normally, the vice commander would be in charge of logistics. Only with good service would the unit be able to win more battles. Considering that the Liaodong Cavalry Regiment was a reinforced unit, there would be many difficult missions in the future. This vice commander would not only be able to manage logistics, it would be best if he could also fight well. This kind of talent was naturally hard to find. Everyone looked at each other and couldn't find a suitable candidate. Although there were vice commanders in each division, no one wanted to recommend their vice commander. After all, it wasn't a promotion, it was just a transfer. Looking at the current Liaodong Iron Cavalry Regiment, it was likely that the vice commander wouldn't even be considered a transfer. No one had a good candidate. Yang Qindong asked with a calm expression, "What? Is no one willing to give up this?" Seeing that Yang Qindong seemed to be a little unhappy, everyone was a little anxious at the moment. They were wondering if they should recommend someone from their own army's deputy commander. But before they could say anything, Commander Bai Shuang suddenly thought of someone and said, "Teacher, I have a suitable candidate. It's just that I don't know much about him. Why do I need teacher to look at him?" Chapter 1158. Suitable, but not understanding. This sentence itself was somewhat contradictory. Bai Shuang's words also attracted everyone's attention. Considering that he didn't make it clear, Bai Shuang smiled bitterly and explained in detail how he met Zhao Xing on the way. "Zhao Xing? I know this person. He escorted the provisions to Jinzhou's Suowei city. Because it was related to logistics, I went to take a look. I still have a deep impression of this person," Beta Persei, who was standing beside Yang Qindong, said after Bai Shuang finished speaking. "Did he really escort the provisions back?" Bai Shuang's eyes flashed as he asked. "That's right." Beta Persei chuckled and continued, "Not only did he transport the provisions back, but he also brought 2,108 surrendered soldiers. According to him, he had a total of 2,200 soldiers. 92 of them escaped for some reason, and most of them came with him to surrender. Oh, by the way, when I went, his soldiers were lined up neatly, even the weapons in their hands were placed neatly together. To be honest, it's the first time I've seen someone surrender like this." The other officers couldn't help but nod in agreement. It wasn't that he hadn't seen people surrender before, but most of them were disheveled and dispirited, looking as if they had lost all hope in life. Their weapons were thrown everywhere, so he had never seen such a carefree and effortless surrender before. Hearing this, even Yang Qindong couldn't help but be curious. "There's such a wonderful person. Come, bring him here so I can see him." "I'll go." Beta Persei agreed. "I'll go with second brother." Bai Shuang thought for a moment and stepped forward. He thought highly of Zhao Xing. Since his teacher wanted to see him, he wanted to say a few words to remind him. The two walked out of the main hall together. Yang Qindong looked at the people who stayed behind, and his gaze fell on the face of the 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Tian Hu. "Commander Tian, how do you feel about this battle?" "Awesome," Tian Hu said without thinking. In this battle, the 4 regiments of cavalry had killed and captured twice the number of enemies. Most importantly, there were almost no heavy casualties on their side. The number of dead and injured did not exceed 100. This kind of difference in casualties greatly comforted him. However, he immediately recalled that they had almost been ambushed. Thinking about how the dozen or so cavalry scouts had been surrounded by the 4th Division and the Black Knights, and how not a single one had managed to escape, his old face turned red again. Tian Hu's face suddenly turned red, which made Yang Qindong swallow back the words he wanted to say. Sometimes, it was okay to give a little pressure, but if the pressure was too much, it was very likely that it would be unable to bear the burden and eventually collapse. The 1st Cavalry Division was his weapon. Naturally, he didn't want anything to happen to it. This time, Yang Qindong called out Tian Hu's name not to remind him of anything, but to consider the current situation. He wanted to expand the size of the 1st Cavalry Division. On the grasslands, there was a very powerful Baiming army called the Liaodong Cavalry. It was said that their strength was extraordinary, and they had a large number of people. They had already expanded from 50,000 to 70,000. Faced with the cavalry elites who came and went like the wind, firearms could only be used to defend, but not to attack. Yang Qindong set his sights on the 1st Cavalry Division. Cavalry against cavalry, speed against speed. Even if they couldn't win, they could at least suppress the threat they brought to him. Looking at the 1st Cavalry Division, they indeed had the qualifications and strength to fight against any opponent. The only thing they lacked was the number of soldiers, only 10,000. Against an enemy 7 times their number, even if they were powerful, they wouldn't be able to gain any advantage. Therefore, expanding the number of soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division became an inevitable matter. Originally, Yang Chendong wanted to expand the division into an army. However, considering that there was no suitable source of soldiers, it was very likely that this would reduce their combat strength. Therefore, he thought about expanding the division on a small scale first. For example, each regiment would be expanded from 2,000 to 4,000 people. This way, it wouldn't reduce their combat strength too much, and it would also increase the number of people, which would be more useful at critical times. With this thought in mind, Yang Chendong looked at Tianhu and took the initiative to suggest, "Commander Tian, if you were to choose these captives first, do you have the confidence to double the current number of soldiers without affecting your own combat strength?" Tian, who was already prepared to be reprimanded by Yang Chendong. After all, he was careless in the first place. He only arranged for sentries to scout the cavalry and didn't arrange for hidden sentries. Fortunately, it was Yang Chendong who came to test him this time. If it was really the enemy, the consequences would be unimaginable. If he made a mistake, he would be punished with a plank. Tian, who didn't become arrogant because of his military exploits. He didn't expect that Yang Chendong didn't want to talk about this. Instead, he wanted to expand the division. Tian, whose eyes immediately lit up. As the opponents became stronger and stronger, especially powerful forces like Biming, which could easily take out millions of soldiers, he felt that the lack of military strength had become the biggest obstacle restricting his performance. He wanted to raise this request to Yang Chendong not too long ago. However, considering that the 1st Cavalry Division's equipment was excellent and the intensity of their training was high, once they expanded, he was afraid that he would have to pay a large sum of money every month. Over the years, he had accumulated a lot of money. This was a matter of great importance. Tian, who suppressed his thoughts and didn't mention it. He didn't expect that Yang Chendong would take the initiative to mention it. How could he miss such an opportunity? He immediately stepped out of the formation and said, "Teacher, this student has already thought about this problem. As long as we carefully select and cooperate with the new veterans, our combat strength shouldn't decrease. In fact, it can definitely be improved. After all, with more soldiers, their momentum would be stronger. The deterrence and attack power to the enemy would also be greater. Well, since you're so confident, then it's settled. At the very least, how many people should we expand? It would be best if we could double the current strength. Of course, if we really don't have that many suitable soldiers, we can't force it. This time, what we want is a strong army, not quantity. As for how much money you need, you can tell Beta Persei later and ask him to give it to you." Yang Chendong wanted Tianhu to say this. If the executor was so confident, what else did he have to worry about? This time, he decided to increase the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division because he was very satisfied with the other party's performance. His actions of probing further confirmed his thoughts. Such an army should be larger in number so that they could better display their strength. As for the problem of money, it really wasn't too big of a problem. Not to mention anything else, the gold and silver mines discovered in the Japanese Empire were enough to solve the current financial pressure on Yangtze. Not to mention, many of the powers in Southeast Asia were now under the Yang faction, allowing them to sell more of their products. There were also many non-core items that were directly exported to other continents through the sea, bringing in countless silver taels. Whether it was an army, a force, or a country, nothing could be done without money. Yang Chendong, who had known this for a long time, had never slacked off in this aspect. Now, it seemed that the effect was very significant. This was also the foundation that allowed him to conquer the world and where his confidence lay. "Thank you, teacher. This student will do it in a while," Tianhu said excitedly. If it weren't for the fact that Yang Chendong was presiding over the meeting, he was afraid that he would have already gone to deal with this matter. As he spoke, the sound of footsteps came from outside the hall. Beta Persei, Bai Shuang, and Zhao Xing walked into the hall. Then, the two in front saluted and stood at attention. Only Zhao Xing knelt on the ground and shouted, "Long live Yang Chendong. You may rise." Yang Chendong looked at Zhao Xing, who was now 7 feet tall, and said indifferently, "Thank you, Bugnam of Gojoseon." Zhao Xing said as he stood up and slowly raised his head. Yang Chendong's appearance reflected in his eyes. "I've heard about your matter. Since you're willing to submit to the 5-star army, this king naturally welcomes you. The provisions were escorted by you, but how do you want to deal with them?" Zhao Xing spoke slowly, as if he was asking for advice, but also as if he was testing him. "Me?" Zhao Xing stretched out his right index finger and pointed at himself, then asked carefully, "I'm just a surrendered general. How can I have the right to discuss such matters?" "Hey, just say it." Bai Shuang could tell that the teacher was testing the waters, so she reminded him softly from the side. Zhao Xing had a good impression of Bai Shuang. Just like on the way here, this person had reminded him a lot. For example, he shouldn't be too afraid when he saw Bugnam of Gojoseon. On the contrary, if there was a chance, he should express his thoughts. Only by leaving a deep impression would he be put in an important position. Now that Bai Shuang had reminded him, Zhao Xing decided to voice his thoughts. He opened his mouth and said, "Bugnam of Gojoseon has given this surrendered general a chance, then this surrendered general will explain it to you. These provisions were snatched by Chandula through the second round of rations. In the process, he even accidentally killed some people, causing the surrounding people to complain. If it's possible, can you give some of these provisions to the people? To be honest, their lives are too hard. This is a bitter cold land, and the winter is very long. As a result, the crops grow very slowly. In order to get these provisions, they have to pay a lot more than others." Zhao Xing explained some of the things he knew in great detail. He was originally a child of the Baiming army. From the moment he was born, his fate could not be changed. However, he was not a person who accepted his fate. Instead, after knowing that everything was irreversible, he actively faced it. He had practiced martial arts since he was young, regardless of whether it was summer or winter. When he had time, he would go to the nearby private schools to listen to the teacher's lectures. You're tuning in to the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.